Chapter 9:12. What Yang Qindong wanted was a Phnom Penh dynasty that could become his logistics base. Not a Phnom Penh dynasty that was devastated, scarred, and could even have civil strife at any time. If this was the case, it was better not to occupy it so as not to spend a lot of energy on it. That would not be worth the loss. Today's mercenaries were like the German army during World War II. They had strong military strength and financial support in the early stages of the war. However, after fighting one battle after another, he was ultimately defeated. One of the most fundamental reasons was that they couldn't see their own strength at all. They thought they were the best in the world, but they didn't know that strong combat power was not equal to strong ruling and management ability. Yang Qindong never thought of becoming a fat man in one bite. What he wanted was how to win wars quickly and steadily without shaking the foundation. For this reason, he set a goal for himself. That was, he would never spend too much time and energy in any war. If he could fight, he would fight. If he couldn't fight, he would withdraw immediately. Otherwise, once he fell into the quagmire of war, he might not be able to extricate himself. Once there was a problem in a certain link, it was not a matter of whether he could win others, but whether he could survive or not. Having a broader vision and a worldview beyond the world was also a major advantage of Yang Qindong. It was something that others could not compare to. Yes, if we can really solve the problem of the Phnom Penh dynasty in 1 or 2 months, then we can really catch them off guard and make them unable to send troops to help. In this way I will do it. I will try to delay the time for Siam and Awa to send troops. After understanding Yang Qindong's intention, Luan Shaoqian promised. Not only that, Laos and Yunnan province need to provide 30,000 people to the Phnom Penh dynasty. There must be a certain proportion of skilled workers among these people. After the war, it means that there will be reconstruction. This work is also very important. What Yang Qindong wanted was not only the full support of Luan Shaoqian, but also the help of people and talents. Of course, the money for the reconstruction of the Phnom Penh dynasty after the disaster will be provided by Chichen City. Laos doesn't have to worry about this. Oh, that shouldn't be a problem. Although Lao province had only been established for a short period of time, it had the support of Chichen City. There were still many technical talents. When the time came, it should not be a problem to allocate about 5,000 people. Luan Shaoqian agreed. Yang Qindong was gratified and said, "Time is tight. I can't reveal that I'm here for the time being. You have to do some work yourself. You also need to inform the governor of Vietnam, Xianxia. These are all my orders. You just need to convey them." Okay, sixth young master, I know what to do. Luan Shaoqian nodded again. He knew that if war broke out, it would have a huge impact on the economic development of Lao province, but he had to follow the overall situation. Even in the long run, it was worth it to lose something now. One was his own people and the other could become a bomb at any time. In the following time, Yang Qindong and Luan Shaoqian talked for half a day in the small courtyard, exchanging opinions on some things. Yang Qindong also proposed a general direction of the development of things. As for the details, it was up to Luan Xiaoli to grasp. The next day, Luan Shaoqian left Mahase City. To the outside world, this was just an ordinary inspection, and it did not attract the attention of any forces. However, when he left, only he himself knew what sort of heavy responsibility he was shouldering. When he thought of the departure, Yang Qindong only gave him half a month to prepare. He felt great pressure, but at the same time he was excited. Once the Phnom Penh dynasty became one of the mercenary forces, it could be imagined that the development of Lao province would enter the fast lane, and the speed of development would be rapid. Half a month to prepare. This was not only the time limit Yang Qindong gave Luan Shaoqian, but also the deadline he gave to the participating forces. As early as 10 days ago, the first city on the grassland received a telegram. 48 hours later, the fully prepared 1st Cavalry Division left the first city area. They traveled at night from the new Airgon Dusi area to the sea town, where a large number of transport ships were waiting for them. The 1st Cavalry Division came and went like a shadow. They did not even have a fixed training place. Everything was based on actual combat. Wherever they appeared, there would often be a war. Even if such an army suddenly disappeared on the grassland, no one would know and notice. This increased the stealth of the operation. When the various forces knew that the 1st Cavalry Division appeared in Southeast Asia and showed their powerful side to the Phnom Penh dynasty, it was already a matter of the future. Not only was the 1st Cavalry Division in action, but the 1st Sea Army of the Navy was also in action. Commander Zhou Xian gave the task of dealing with the Phnom Penh dynasty to Long Yuntian, the commander of the 3rd Division. Yang Qindong had personally promoted this person from an acting regiment commander to the position of a division commander. This time it was time for him to perform and repay Yang Qindong. Advancing on both land and sea could greatly damage the Phnom Penh dynasty and shorten the time to occupy this place. In addition, he personally led more than 8,000 soldiers of the 4th Division of the 1st Sea Army, plus 8,000 soldiers of 20 auxiliary battalions. He seemed to have seen the scene of the 5-star flag being placed all over the Phnom Penh dynasty. After Yuan Shaoqian returned to Wanxiang City, where the provincial government was located, he immediately made a series of arrangements. Some of them were for the province, some were for the province, some were for the province, some were for the economy, some were for the civil affairs, and some were for the military. 2 days later, Yuan Shaoqian attended a regular meeting at the Lao Commerce Bureau and gave a speech. In view of the recent friendly relations with Siam and Ava, in order to deepen the relationship and cooperation between each other, the export point of goods was increased by 5% and the price was lowered by 5%. The comparison of 5% between the two countries increased the interests of the merchants of the two countries by far more than 10%. It would only be more. When the news came out, the merchants of the two countries were jubilant, and the major forces behind those merchants were also very happy. Since ancient times, officials and merchants were closely related. Yuan Shaoqian saw through this and made this move. With this agreement, it could be greatly guaranteed that once the Phnom Penh dynasty was attacked, the reinforcements of Siam and Ava would slow down. After all, once they chose to fight with the mercenaries, it would inevitably affect the trade and the income and living standards of those in power. 3 days later, Yuan Shaoqian represented the Lao government to express great dissatisfaction with the Phnom Penh dynasty's blockade of the border. 2 days later, the Lao army in the province began to move frequently. Under the leadership of General He Guang, they quickly moved to the border area of the province and began to gather a large amount of food. When there was a change in the military, it was often the first to attract attention. The spies of Phnom Penh, Siam and Ava in Laos also moved. However, what they did not understand was that the mercenaries stationed in Laos and Vietnam, the 2nd Division of the Cold Front under Luo Pu, did not move at all. They were still training in the barracks. From time to time they could see the army running and training outside the barracks. The Lao army was just a local army, so it was not scary. The 2nd Division of the mercenaries was the existence that could affect the hearts of the 3 countries. Therefore, after seeing this result, the 3 parties almost all had the same opinion. That was, the Lao army's movement was just to deter the Phnom Penh dynasty. They did not intend to really move. Of course, if the Lao army really moved, it was still uncertain whether they could defeat the Phnom Penh dynasty. 3 days after the decision was made, they thought that the Lao army's movement would stop. After all, there was nothing to see if there was only thunder and no rain. However, what they did not expect was that the Lao army did not stop the so-called deterrence movement. On the contrary, they sent troops to Shangding City. Both sides stationed troops on the border. It was a sign that a storm was brewing. Siam and Ava could no longer stand by and do nothing. They sent out envoys to mediate between the 2 countries. In their eyes, the best situation was for all sides to get along well with each other. Anyone who wanted to break this situation would be their enemy. The appearance of the messengers of the 2 countries seemed to ease the situation. At least they did not see the Lao army sending troops. While everyone was relieved, the messengers of Siam and Ava found the messenger of the Phnom Penh dynasty. They expressed their concern about the current situation. Since the Lao army had restrained themselves from sending troops, should the Phnom Penh dynasty make a friendly gesture and withdraw some troops from the border between the 2 countries? The messenger of the Phnom Penh dynasty was calm about this matter. He already knew that it was only the Lao army that came. He did not care about this kind of army. Not to mention, according to their statistics, the number of troops that came was not even 10,000. On the contrary, the Phnom Penh dynasty stationed 50,000 troops at the border. Whether it was the comparison of numbers or the comparison of military strength, they seemed to have the advantage. Under such circumstances, how could they retreat easily? It doesn't matter. The Lao army just wants to show that they are the boss. There will be no war. This was the answer of the messenger of the Phnom Penh dynasty. For this answer, the messengers of Siam and Ava agreed. In fact, they were also in a difficult position. As allies, they had to advance and retreat together. However, establishing a good relationship with Laos, especially in terms of business, would allow them to earn more money. None of the losses seemed to be something that they could afford. Chapter 9:13. Fortunately, it was the Laos army that came this time, so there was nothing to worry about. In this way, while reminding the messengers of the Golden Border dynasty not to be careless, they also paid more attention to the mercenary army. In their view, as long as the trump card army did not move, the war would not break out. Even if there was an uncontrollable situation, it would only be a small-scale battle and would not affect the overall situation. Some people even thought that this was clearly a performance of Governor Luan Xiaoqian's strong appearance. He just wanted to scare the Golden Border dynasty. When this opinion finally became a consensus, even the messengers in charge of mediation were not as enthusiastic as before. However, except for Luan Xiaoqian and He Guang, no one else knew that Yang Qindong, known as the God of War, had arrived at Shangding City and was holding a military meeting there. It had been 15 days since Yang Qindong and Luan Xiaoqian met. In other words, the war would start at any time. Today, Yang Qindong's sudden appearance in the city lord's mansion in Shangding City had really shocked He Guang's subordinates. However, their general He Guang's expression was calm. Obviously, he had already known about this matter. At the beginning of the mission, He Guang was also a group of people who were kept in the dark. Luan Xiaoqian just told him to take 8,000 Laos soldiers to Shangding City to scare the Golden Border dynasty's troops there. He Guang himself did not reject this order. He also thought that it was very unsafe to be surrounded by foreign armies in the borderlands. Therefore, after receiving the mission, he set off. Along the way, he deliberately made a noise as if he was afraid that others would not know about it. When they arrived at Dingxi City, He Guang saw Yang Qindong, who had arrived earlier than them. He turned pale with fright. He didn't understand why the sixth young master would be alarmed by such a simple display of force. But until he met him and received the mission, he realized that it was not a deterrence, but a real attack on the Golden Border dynasty. He Guang was the general of the Lao army, and it would be difficult to hide anything from him. Therefore, Yang Qindong chose to meet him as soon as possible and told him his strategy, which was to steal the sky and change the sun. With the Laos army as the base, the 4th Division of the Cold Front Army wore their clothes and pretended to be them. They appeared in Shangding City and quietly completed their pre-war arrangements. Of course, there was still some work to be done. For example, after the Laotian army entered the city, they would need to go back and forth. Only a small number of people would leave the city, while a large number of people would return to the city. This way, the Laotian army would be able to bring the entire army into the city. The soldiers who had already entered the city had to hide in the houses of the citizens to avoid detection from the spies of the other countries. Fortunately, the Golden Bian dynasty had stationed their troops outside Shangding City for a long time. Most of the people in the city had fled in fear. In addition, there had been a massacre in Shangding City before, so there were many empty houses. It was not a problem for more than 10,000 mercenaries to live in. The meeting officially began. In front of many officers, Yang Qindong announced that the army would leave the city at midnight and attack the Golden Bian army. According to Yang Qindong, this time the 8,000 Laotian soldiers did not need to fight on the battlefield. They only needed to follow the army and look for prisoners and territory. When the news was announced, many Laotian officers breathed a sigh of relief, but at the same time, they looked at the unfamiliar officers in front of them with some suspicion. As far as they knew, the 6th young master led the 4th Division of the Cold Front Army this time, plus 20 auxiliary battalions, a total of more than 16,000 people. Among them, the main task of 20 auxiliary battalions was to capture captives on the battlefield. How could they really defeat 50,000 enemies on the opposite side with just one cold vanguard division, and take down Jiba City like a hot knife through butter? Or even take down the entire Golden Bian dynasty? Even if this division was powerful, it would be difficult for them to do that. Should they say that the 6th young master was confident or arrogant? The meeting went smoothly. With Yang Qindong there, almost everything was decided by him. The others had no chance to interrupt, let alone dare to question anything. In this way, they watched Yang Qindong announce the entire battle plan. I will reiterate one point. The main task of the auxiliary troops is to follow the main force of the 4th Division, provide them with ammunition, capture prisoners on the battlefield, and carry out simple battlefield rescue. The main task of the Laotian army is to receive and take care of the prisoners, receive the granaries and various warehouses in the cities we captured along the way, and do the necessary registration and arrange for the people sent from other places to live in the Siam pool. In this I hope that everyone can perform well. If anyone dares to hide the trophies or be absent during the war, don't blame the military law for being merciless. These words were Yang Qindong's reminder to the Laotian army. Because whether it was the Cold Front Army or the auxiliary troops, they were known for their strict military discipline. The Laotian army, on the other hand, was mostly made up of the original soldiers of the Kanglan Kingdom. Although they had undergone a certain restructuring, most of them were old and weak in the army, but this did not mean that they were really obedient. Yang Qindong did not want the soldiers to fight in the front line, but some people's selfishness caused problems in the rear. If that happened, he would inevitably have to find someone to punish. War was a matter of money, but at the same time, plundering resources was also a considerable amount of wealth. After so many years, the Golden Bian dynasty had some wealth, which would play a huge role in the reconstruction of this place after the war. After the order was given, He Guang's expression became very ugly. He knew that the sixth young master did not trust the Laotian army, but he could not refute. He could only stand at attention and say, "Sixth young master, please rest assured, I will definitely rectify the military discipline. If something like this happens, you don't need to kill, I will kill them and send them to you personally." Very good, I hope that this is not just for show but for reality. Oh right, I forgot to remind you, I have sent a secret unit to watch everything in the dark. Whether you really did it or not, I will know very clearly. Yang Qindong nodded and did not forget to remind He Guang again. If he warned them to this extent and they still showed their greedy nature, then he could only kill them as an example. He Guang and the officers of the auxiliary troops quickly left. Only Yang Qindong, Ling Daqiang and the 4 regimental commanders were left in the room. The 5 of them stood in a line. Yang Qindong looked at them with a smile, and then helped them tidy up their uniforms. You don't need to feel pressured. To be honest, your opponents this time are still very strong. Sixth young master, we are not afraid of strong opponents, we will be stronger than them. Ling Daqiang said confidently. Yes, we will be stronger than them. The 4 regimental commanders said in unison. At the same time, their faces were filled with killing intent and confidence, as if their bodies were burning, and they were ready for a bloody battle on the battlefield. The 4 regimental commanders were the 1st regimental commander, Gao Xiang, the 2nd regimental commander, He Wen, the 3rd regimental commander, Lu Zheng, and the 4th regimental commander, Yi Fingxing. They had all been promoted step by step as soldiers, and that was how they became regimental commanders. The 4 of them had also entered the military department of Rezin City Academy to further their studies. They were capable of wielding guns and killing people, and were also well versed in all kinds of military books. This time, the formation of the First Army was a good opportunity for them, and they had all been promoted from battalion to regimental commanders. This time it was time for them to perform well on the battlefield. As young as they were naturally filled with confidence, and with the most powerful firearms in the world in their hands, they naturally would not put ordinary enemies in their eyes. It was a good thing for an officer to have confidence and morale. Yang Qindong chuckled and said, "It is good that you have the confidence to win. However, I think you have misunderstood my meaning. This time your opponents are not outsiders but your own people." Our own people? Including Ling Daqiang, the 5 soldiers were all puzzled. They didn't understand what this meant. Could it be that the 2nd division had also come? If that was the case, then they would be under a lot of pressure. The 2 ND division's commander, Luo Pe, was second only to Leng Song and the others in the army. Everyone respected him. Yes, our own people. They are a cavalry unit that I formed when I was in the grasslands. Many of them even have foreign faces. Of course they are all Han now, just like you all. That's right, they have a very resounding name, the world's first cavalry division. Don't say that this young master didn't warn you. Although they are using cavalry sabers based on the speed of their war horses, they may not be inferior to you. You must be mentally prepared and not be outdone by others. Yang Qindong had a smile on his face when he thought about the news that the world's first cavalry division would arrive at Shangding City in the afternoon. He was looking forward to seeing who would perform better on the battlefield, Leng Feng or the cavalry. Hearing that it was cavalry, Ling Daqiang's expression became much more serious. Humans were naturally slower than cavalry, but fortunately they had brought enough bicycles for this trip, so it was not much of a difference. he immediately said, "We are not afraid of any competition. Every one of our soldiers has undergone arduous training and extremely difficult tests. We believe that we are outstanding enough." Yes, that is a good point. However, every one of the cavalry of the 1st Regiment has also undergone strict and even harsh tests before they were able to join the army. They have gone through countless trials of life and death before they were able to achieve their goals. They are not inferior to you in any way. Yang Qindong thought about the bloody battle with Tuochuo Buhua de Han that lasted for a month. Now that they had undergone several months of arduous training, he believed that Tian Hu would bring him more surprises. Chapter 9:14. After giving them enough pressure, Yang Qinjiang turned and left, leaving Ling Daqiang and the other 4 commanders behind. Their expressions were not good. Because on the table in front of them, there was an introduction about the 1st Cavalry Division. Oh my God, they are all people who participated in the Blood War. Their experience on the battlefield is not something we can compare to. The 1st commander, Gao Xiang, looked at the information seriously and said with a sigh, This opponent cannot be underestimated." The 2nd commander, He Wen, frowned and said. The 3rd commander, Lu Jing, also said, "That's right. In comparison, although the selection of our soldiers is extremely harsh, they do not have much actual combat experience. Don't be afraid." The 4th commander, Yi Xingfeng, saw that the 3 commanders were trying to diminish his own morale and boost the morale of others, so he said, "We have the strongest guns in the world. This is something that no other army can compare to. This is our advantage." Well said. Ling Daqiang nodded at Yi Xingfeng. Although we have been cooped up in Crimson City for a long time and do not have much actual combat experience, our usual drills are not a joke. The death rate of 3 out of 10,000 in actual combat practice is enough to prove everything. And now is the time to prove our strength. I originally thought that this battle would be too easy and boring. Now that we have such a strong competitor, it is time for us to perform well. We need to use our actions to tell the 6th young master that we, the Cold Front, will always be the strongest. Yes, we, the Cold Front, will always be the strongest. The 4 commanders were stirred up and said in unison. At this moment, every single one of them was exuding a strong fighting spirit. Yang Qindong walked out of the main hall, followed by Beta Persei, who looked like he wanted to say something. Hey, if you have something to say, just say it. When did you learn to stammer like a girl? Yang Qindong noticed the change in Beta Persei and laughed. Young master, I am worried. Will your words affect the morale of the 4th Division? If they are pressured too much or their morale is damaged and they do not perform well, then it will be difficult for us to solve the problem of the Phnom Penh dynasty in 1 or 2 months with only 10,000 people. If this drags on, once Siam and Ava send troops, the situation will be bad. Beta Persei raised his head and looked seriously at Yang Qindong's back. It's okay, young master knows what to do. Besides, if the Cold Front can't even stand this little bit of pressure, then they are not worthy of their name. As for the result, we'll just have to wait and see. Yang Qindong laughed as he spoke. Only when there was competition would there be motivation. So what if he was Ling Feng? When it was time to carry the burden, he would carry it. To be honest, he had high hopes for the 1st Cavalry Division. He was looking forward to their perfect performance in this battle. The 1st Cavalry Division that Yang Qindong thought highly of had arrived at a forest outside Shangding City. After arriving here, Division Commander Tian Hu ordered the whole army to dismount and rest. When the sky was completely dark, they would enter the city to meet the 6th young master. They were originally made up of the most elite cavalrymen. After a few months of training, the 3 regiments of 6,000 men were completed. After a long period of training, the 6,000 cavalrymen dismounted when they heard the order. The warriors leaned against the trees and closed their eyes to sleep. Tian Hu often said that an army that did not know how to use the time to rest was an unqualified army. A real soldier could use all the time to rest even if they were in a hurry in order to perform better in the upcoming battle. The division commander's order was carried out and carried out. Now that the order was given, except for the necessary scouts who were still wandering outside, the rest of the soldiers entered a state of rest. Tian Hu first patrolled the area and looked at the surrounding terrain. In his mind, he came up with all sorts of solutions in case of an emergency. Then he came to the bottom of a big tree. Here his 3 captains were already waiting for him. The 1st Regimental Commander, Taimur, the 2nd Regimental Commander Lu Duo and the 3rd Regimental Commander Hu Bo sat there with a bloody aura. This was caused by them killing too many people recently. It was worth mentioning here that the 3 regimental commanders of the 1st Cavalry Division, which Yang Chendong thought highly of, were all captives. Just this spirit alone was enough to make few people rival them. Division Commander. When Tian Hu appeared, the 3 regimental commanders stood up together with a respectful expression. This was not only because they were regimental commanders and Tian Hu was their commanding officer, but also because Tian Hu had used his own strength to conquer them. During this period of time, with the first city and the embryonic North Desert City as the center point, they patrolled several times within 1,000 miles of the surrounding area. Whenever they encountered a patrolling cavalry from a hostile force, they would kill them without hesitation. Among them, Tian Hu had killed the most enemies. His dual sabers were like an art. Once he killed the enemy, it was dazzling and impossible for the enemy to guard against. In the grassland there was a saying of the 3 tigers. Tiger's Mane, Iron Tiger and Tian Hu were listed as the 3 tigers by the Heavenly Khan's side. This meant that they were the most powerful and invincible existences. To be listed as one of the 3 tigers, Tian Hu was naturally very happy. However, he also knew that this was just a saying among the people and was not recognized by Yang Chendong. In his eyes, it was extremely important to get the recognition of the 6th young master. Therefore, after receiving the order this time, he made up his mind to perform well and let the 6th young master see his ability. He wanted to let the 6th young master know that it was a right decision to hand over the 1st Cavalry Division to him. "Take a seat," Tian Hu said casually. Usually he was still very approachable. Only on the battlefield would he become a butcher, a killing tool. If someone violated the military law at that time and fell into his hands, they would definitely suffer a fate worse than death. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the battle plan, so I'll only say one thing. This is the first chance for us, the 1st Cavalry Division, to show off in front of the 6th young master. I don't want to see anyone holding us back. In short, once we're on the battlefield, charge forward with all your might and kill with all your might. We'll definitely get the credit. Tian Hu's expression was calm, but he was also very serious as he spoke. This was to set the tone for this battle. The 3 captains all nodded in agreement. However, the 1st commander, Taimura, expressed his opinion. "Commander, I heard that our competitor is the 4th Division of the Cold Front. They are all equipped with firearms. Although they don't have war horses, they have bicycles that can move freely and they don't need to eat food. I'm afraid that their speed won't be too slow. Firearms are powerful, but charging on the battlefield requires time to aim and preparation. Every soldier has to bring a large amount of ammunition with them. This will definitely slow them down." The 2nd commander, Lu Duo, said without a change in expression. He was clearly very confident. "Commander Lu is right. We have the fastest speed on land. No one will be faster than us." Hu Bo-er agreed. Although they were all surrendered generals, Hu Bo-er's surrender was still out of everyone's expectations. This person was originally from the Tatar faction. He had seen the army being defeated by the mercenaries with his own eyes. No one knew if he really wanted to take revenge. Because of this, someone had reminded Tian Hu that this person could be used. However, he must not give him any real power. He must not be allowed to become a commander. Otherwise, if something happened, it would be a huge problem. Before Yang Chendong left, he had specifically instructed that Tian Hu could make decisions for the 1st Cavalry Division. As long as their fighting strength increased and they could win battles, they could ignore the opinions of others. However, in the face of such a huge problem, Tian Hu still reported to the new commander Tiger's Man, and the deputy commander Shibi. After Yang Chendong left the grasslands, the number 1 person in the military was undoubtedly Tiger's Man. Whether it was seniority, contributions or influence in the military, no one could surpass him. In addition, he was the only one with the rank of Major General among them, so it was reasonable to report to him if there was anything to report. When Tian Hu reported that Hu Bo-er was going to be the commander of the 3rd Cavalry Division, Tiger's Man only asked him one thing: if you feel that he's sincerely working for the mercenaries, you can control him and use him. No problem. Although he's the commander of the 3rd Cavalry Division, most of our brothers are here for the war god and the Khan. He can't do anything alone. If he dares to betray us, I'll make him regret ever being born. However, he's still a surrendered general and a newly surrendered one at that. If he's given such a huge responsibility now, what should I say? I'm also a surrendered general. Deputy Commander Shibi finally opened his mouth to speak. Tian, who stood at attention when he heard this joke. He knew what to do. Not long after, Hubo was appointed as the 3rd commander of the 1st Cavalry Division. Back then, when he received this mission, even a man like Hubo had cried. He did not expect the mercenaries to trust him so much. Even if he were to throw 100 gene of meat here, it would not be a big deal. Of course, after receiving this appointment, Hubo made a request. He wanted to be the vanguard when the mercenaries attacked Yeshen. He wanted to take revenge for Tuachuo Buhua. If Hubo didn't make this request, Tian Hu might have been suspicious. However, because of this request, he was relieved and agreed to it in front of Hubo. Hence, Hubo could be considered a mid-level officer in the mercenaries. Alright, everyone should have this kind of confidence. As for the 1st commander's worries, we need to take them seriously. I've thought about this problem too. We need to make use of our strengths and use our speed to our advantage. If we encounter a city on the way, we don't need to force our way in. Instead, we need to go around it and clear out the surroundings. This way we won't be tied down by the city and can make use of our advantage. Tian Hu said. Chapter 9:15. Being the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division was not just about bravery. Back then, Yang Qindong had chosen Tian Hu out of everyone else because Tian Hu had studied in the academy and had a good understanding of the art of war. Now it seemed that this person was indeed good at leading troops into battle. The 4 of them quickly reached a consensus and entered the city under the moonlight when it was dark. At this moment, Shangding City was already under martial law and curfew was imposed at night. There was a rule that no one was allowed to go out after dark or they would be punished for collaborating with the enemy. Therefore, even the people living in Shangding City could only hear the sound of horses on the ground, but they had no idea how many troops were outside. Several secret agents of the Golden Bian dynasty felt that something was wrong, so they sneaked out of their homes and wanted to spread the news. However, as soon as they went out on the street, they were caught by the security bureau who had been waiting for a long time, and they were all captured alive. The news that the army was gathering and was about to launch an attack was tightly covered up. In the main hall of the Castellan mansion, Yang Qindong met the officers of the 1st Cavalry Division who came from the grassland. As soon as they appeared in the hall, a murderous aura unconsciously filled the air, which made Ling Daqiang, the commander of the 4th Cold Front Division, and the regimental commanders under him feel refreshed, and they blurted out unconsciously. What a strong murderous aura. This must be an army that has gone through countless tests on the battlefield. Our opponents are quite strong. We are under pressure. Don't be afraid. The greater the pressure, the greater the motivation. Although the officers were talking in private, Yang Qindong still saw their performance. He coughed softly and said, I called you here today to let you meet each other and get to know each other. When you need to be united on the battlefield, you must be united, but when you need to compete, you must compete. Remember, war is not a treat. You must show your true ability. I am waiting to see your performance and give you credit. Yes. Everyone nodded at Yang Qindong in unison. Well, there is one thing I want to tell you in advance. I have promised the governor of Laos, Luan Shaochen, that we will take down the Phnom Penh dynasty in 1 to 2 months. You have to work hard and don't let me break my promise. With a chuckle, Yang Qindong set the date for the war. None of the officers had any doubts about this, as if this was a very reasonable request. On the other hand, General He Guang, who was fortunate enough to be a part of this, had a face full of shock. From the moment Tian Hu walked into the hall with the 3 officers, he felt an inexplicable sense of nervousness. Perhaps it was because the murderous aura of these people was too strong. He couldn't figure out where the 6th young master got these killing machines from. They gave him the feeling that they were a scabbard that could be unsheathed at any time, making him feel suffocated. However, that pressure was not as great as the pressure that Yang Qindong's words gave him. How could it be possible to destroy the Phnom Penh dynasty in 1 to 2 months? No wonder He Guang had such an idea. Even if the Laos army was fully prepared, it would take at least 2 to 3 years to finish the war. The Phnom Penh dynasty was a country with an army of 250,000 and a navy of 50,000. How could it be possible to destroy the Phnom Penh dynasty in such a short time with only 10,000 people? No matter how many doubts He Guang had, the meeting still went on as usual. The provisions, weapons and other things you need are all in the city's warehouse. In a while you can send troops to get them. Take as much as you can because once the war starts, our logistics won't be able to supply as fast as your attack. At that time you can only snatch everything you need from the enemy's hands. It was obvious that he meant to rob. Hearing this, the officers of the 4th Division of the Cold Front and the 1st Cavalry Division were extremely excited. If they could rob the land they occupied at will while fighting, then their last doubt would be solved. Feeling the excitement of these officers, Yang Chendong just smiled and didn't say anything. He didn't even ask them to not hurt the civilians. The Phnom Penh dynasty was inseparable from the Han people in terms of historical origin. However, in recent years, the Han people were regarded as slaves and as thorns in their flesh. Just this blockade, the Security Bureau had already received news that countless Han people were killed by the Phnom Penh dynasty. Yang Chendong naturally wouldn't be polite to such a people. He never thought that he had a big heart, nor did he think that repaying evil with good was the right thing to do. If that was the case, then how should he repay the virtuous people? Repaying kindness with evil? As for whether or not the Han would suffer losses in this battle, this was something that could not be avoided. However, as long as the Han people were smart enough to declare that they were Han people, no matter if it was the Lung Feng, the mercenaries or the local forces like He Guang's Lao army, they would not dare to kill the Han people. Otherwise, if they were found guilty, they would be severely punished and their futures would be cut off or even their lives. There was less than an hour before midnight, but a quarter of the items in the warehouse were already gone. Beta Persei had experience in managing logistics, so this time he also helped to check on the situation. When he saw that there were still so many war supplies left in the warehouse, he reported the matter to Chendong. Young Master, the 4th Division of the Cold Front and the 1st Cavalry Division only took 5 days of rations, and most of the heavy equipment is also piled in the warehouse. It seems that they want to use the war to support the war. After listening, Yang Chendong analyzed the thoughts of these officers. This was also good. With less heavy items they could maximize their speed. This also made Yang Chendong very curious. He was looking forward to seeing the excellent performance of these 2 elite units. The supplies were distributed to the soldiers one by one, and then everyone began to check their weapons and equipment an hour before the war to make the final preparations. The guns were wiped again and again, and the horses were also fed, which would be more conducive to the horses' speed. Soon it was almost midnight. After the order was given, the east and west gates of Shangding City were immediately opened, and then an army of 8,400 rode out of the city on bicycles, while an army of 6,000 rode out quietly on horses. They avoided the south gate, which was the closest to the enemy. When they all left Shangding City from the east and west, the sound of iron horses galloping on the ground spread out. 1 man and 2 horses, a total of 12,000 horses, like a dragon entering the sea, went straight to the army of Phnom Penh dynasty. They moved so fast. Everyone speed up. Feeling the tremors from the earth, the commander of the 4th Division, Ling Daqiang, also shouted loudly. Then more than 8,000 bicycles rushed to the first blockade line 10 miles away from Shangding City under the moonlight. When it came to short distance marching on a plain, no one would be a match for the cavalry. What's more, which soldier of the 1st Cavalry Division was not a master of horsemanship? They leaned lightly on the horses to reduce wind resistance, and quickly went to the first blockade line of the Phnom Penh dynasty. This blockade line had been in place for nearly half a year. In the beginning they were still nervous for a while, afraid that the mercenaries would suddenly kill them. But as the days passed and nothing happened, everyone unconsciously relaxed their vigilance. Just like tonight, most of the soldiers of the Phnom Penh dynasty were still asleep. All of a sudden they felt the earth tremble. Those who were highly alert and sleepy crawled out of their beds. However, most of the soldiers were still lying in their blankets. It was the end of winter and the beginning of spring, so the temperature outside their blankets was still very cold. The 1st Regiment on the left, the 2nd Regiment on the right and the 3rd Regiment at the back. Charge! Division Commander Tian, who took the lead. Seeing that the enemy camp with torches was less than 2 miles away, he issued the slogan to charge and kill the enemy. After the order was issued, the 1st Cavalry Division quickly changed the formation. The cavalry warriors of the 1st and 2nd Regiment also held a sword in one hand and a shield in the other to prevent the enemy's long-distance bow and arrow counterattack. The distance of 2 miles passed quickly. When they were 100 meters away from the enemy's bows and arrows were shot, but only sporadic crossbows. For the cavalry warriors who were used to Mongolian bows, such arrows were no different from scratching an itch. They either blocked with shields or slashed with swords. Soon they rushed to the top of the formation. Then the horses galloped and slashed. One by one, the Phnom Penh soldiers who had no time to react were cut down to the ground. Nearly 500 Phnom Penh soldiers who were responsible for night duty were killed in just one encounter. When the cavalry warriors rushed to the enemy camp and found that most of the enemy's tents were still motionless, the 1st and 2nd Regiments calmly issued the order to throw long hooks and pull the tents. The so-called throwing long hooks and pulling the tents meant that the cavalry threw out long hooks one by one and hung them on the 4 corners of the tents. Then 4 groups of horses ran in different directions, forcibly tearing the tents apart at the fastest speed. The enemy in the tents was exposed to them without reservation. The cavalry, who had been trained and practiced many times, was in groups of 4. Soon the tents were forcibly uprooted one by one. Countless Phnom Penh soldiers were exposed under the moonlight. Most of them were not even properly dressed, let alone holding any weapons in their hands. This was a one-sided massacre. It was a passive battle that no one had prepared for. The 5,000 soldiers of the Phnom Penh dynasty in the first blockade line were all killed in less than half an hour. Not a single one was left alive. Chapter 9:16. During this period of time, the 3rd Regiment did not remain idle. With their regiment commander Hu-bo-er as their leader, they charged towards the right camp. Following the example of the 5,000 enemy troops, they were quickly wiped out. If not for the fact that Hu-bo-er had noticed that the 4th Regiment of the Lung Fong Regiment had arrived and was in a hurry to leave, they would not have been able to kill so few of them. "All right, the brothers of Lung Fong are here. Let's retreat." Hu-bo-er blew a loud whistle and the 2,000 cavalrymen obeyed the order. Just like when they appeared, they left as quickly as they came without any hesitation. In less than 3 minutes, the vanguard regiment of the 4th Regiment, Zhou Xian, had arrived on the battlefield. When he saw that the ground was littered with the corpses of the enemy and the gold-rimmed soldiers who were squatting on the ground and trembling in fear, he did not feel any excitement in the face of victory. Instead, he cursed angrily, King World's 1st Cavalry Division, at least leave 2 people for us to kill. The first blockade was broken like a piece of paper. Tian, who was not satisfied with the current situation. His goal was simple. He wanted to use a night's time to break through the 5 blockades. When the gates opened in the morning, he wanted to kill his way into the city. This was using speed to fight speed. Taking advantage of the fact that the enemy did not have time to react, he wanted to kill his way into the city. This was a bold idea that would exceed everyone's expectations. However, this was also a feasible strategy. Taking advantage of the enemy's lack of defense, the cavalrymen could rely on their speed to accomplish this. However, the prerequisite for all of this was that the 1st Cavalry Division could not afford to slack off or be obstructed in the slightest. After wiping out the enemy's first line of defense, Tian, whose confidence was greatly boosted, he immediately proposed the second plan of attack. The next line of defense would no longer be attacked by divisions, but by regiments. The second line of defense would be left to the 1st Cavalry Regiment, while the 2nd and 3rd Cavalry Regiments would charge forward without stopping. The 2nd Cavalry Regiment would attack the 3rd line of defense, while the 3rd Cavalry Regiment would attack the 4th line of defense. The cycle would repeat, and the 5th line of defense would be left to the 1st Cavalry Regiment who had just arrived. This way they could use the least amount of time to break through the enemy's blockade line one by one and achieve the strategic goal of entering Jiba City at dawn. Before the operation, the 3 regimental commanders and the battalion commanders already knew the specifics of the second plan. The division commander gave the order, and the 3 regiments immediately rushed forward at full speed. The facts had already proven that there were only 5,000 people on their side. With just a regiment of 2,000 cavalry, it was very likely that they would be able to wipe them out. The world's 1st Cavalry Division was advancing at an unimaginable speed. Compared to them, the 4 divisions of the Cold Front were slower. However, they were only slightly slower than the cavalry. After all, they mainly relied on firearms, and the weight of the supplies they carried was higher than that of the cavalry. However, they were almost running all the way without any intention of stopping. It was obvious that the cavalry division had helped them set up the first blockade. This made the soldiers of the 4th Division feel very humiliated. They swore that they would repay this humiliation by helping the cavalry division to set up a blockade. Only then could they be considered to be on par with the cavalry division. In order to achieve this goal, the commander of the 4th Regiment, Ling Daqiang, kept urging the cold front to speed up again and again. The wheels under everyone's feet were pushed to the limit. However, when they had just taken down the second blockade line of the Golden Bian dynasty, the scouts had already reported that the cavalry division had taken down the 2nd, 3rd, and 5th blockade lines in the west. The 4th blockade line was almost destroyed, and the cavalry regiment was heading towards the 5th blockade line. Damn, they divided their forces. The 1st Regiment commander Zhou Xian was shocked. They only used 6,000 people in total and they dared to divide their forces like this. They are really brave. The 2nd Regiment commander He Wen praised sincerely. As expected of the 1st Cavalry Division. This time our 4th Regiment has a worthy opponent. The 3rd Regiment commander Lu Jing said. In the end it was the 4th Regiment commander Yi Xingfeng who suggested, "Commander, let's divide our forces too. It has been proven that the soldiers of the Golden Bian dynasty are too weak. We didn't use any firearms at all. We easily broke the 2nd blockade line with our long swords. Yes, divide our forces. We will divide our forces too. Everyone, don't be discouraged. Although our performance in the first battle was not as good as the 1st Cavalry Division, we will definitely get back at them in the future. Because we are the most elite cold front in the world. No one can be stronger than us." Ling Daqiang encouraged the soldiers with his words. However, he didn't notice that he was calling them the 1st Cavalry Division before, but now he was calling them the 1st Cavalry Division. The change in the title alone was enough to show his respect and recognition for the 1st Cavalry Division. Whether it was the 1st Cavalry Division or the 4th Cold Front Division, they were like two flying arrows that pierced into the army of the Golden Bian dynasty. They broke the enemy's defenses again and again with lightning speed. Except for the 1st blockade line, there was a unit on night duty. There were only a few dozen soldiers on duty at the back lines. Facing the world's strongest army, they were defeated before they could even form a counterattack. The front line kept winning, but the 8,000 auxiliary soldiers and 8,000 Laotian soldiers behind suffered. One of them followed the 4th Cold Front Division while the other followed the 1st Cavalry Division. Wherever they went there were dead bodies of the enemy. There were not even many wounded soldiers. A large amount of food and weapons were thrown on the ground for the soldiers to pick up. At first, everyone was very excited. However, after passing 2 blockade lines, the scene was still the same when they came to the 3rd one. They were a little numb. Most importantly, they were carrying too many spoils of war on their backs and they could no longer move. The 6th young master ordered us to put all the spoils together and cover them with the enemy's tents. Wait for the other troops behind to come and collect them. The rest of you continue to move forward and find a way to keep up with the main army. The new order relieved the pressure on the 2 logistics troops. Except for a small number of troops left behind to guard the spoils, most of the soldiers moved forward lightly, hoping to catch up with the main army. However, reality told them that they couldn't catch up with the main army. They couldn't even see a shadow of the main army. Yang Chendong also set out from Shangding City under the protection of 1,000 guards. The army in front of him won one battle after another, which made him feel good. Whether it was the 4th Cold Front Division or the 1st Cavalry Division, they didn't let him down. Originally, he was worried that 1 to 2 months was too short to destroy the Golden Bian dynasty. Now it seems that he should be worried about the lack of backup troops. There were too many spoils on the battlefield and they couldn't be transported. Beta Persei, has the city lord of Shangding City mobilized the people? Yang Chendong asked Beta Persei as he rode the white dragon towards Xiba City. The young master has begun to mobilize. The young master is amazing. He used money to hire the people and let them be our logistics troops. This way the spoils can be stored quickly and the people can earn money from it. Let them see the power of our army and form a deterrent force. It's really killing several birds with one stone. Beta Persei flattered with admiration. Since ancient times, fighting on the battlefield has always been the business of the soldiers. When did the people get involved? But only their sixth young master could come up with such a method. In this case, there were 70,000 to 80,000 people in Shangding City. Excluding the children of the elderly, there were also 50,000 adult men and women. In this way it was equivalent to 50,000 more logistics troops, which would greatly reduce the pressure on the army. And as more and more cities were occupied along the way, there would be a lot of Han people in them. Wouldn't they be able to help the army and earn some money for themselves? This kind of good policy that was beneficial to the army and the people, perhaps only their sixth young master could come up with it. Beta Persei didn't know that Yang Qindong was well aware of the importance of the relationship between the army and the people. He was even more aware that the victory of his era was pushed by the people. With the ready-made experience he was just using it. With the participation of 50,000 people, a large number of spoils of war were quickly carried back to Shangding City by the people who pulled the carriages. The mercenaries made money by counting the weight of the items they brought back. They could earn as much money as they wanted. Soon the people tied the spoils of war to their bodies. Those who came late had nothing left to take. Fortunately, the mercenaries then gave the sixth young master's order. There were no more spoils of war from this battle, but there would be more spoils of war if they captured other cities. If the people wanted to make money, they could follow behind the mercenaries and there would be many more opportunities. In this way, a very spectacular scene was formed. The two main forces of the mercenaries were charging at the front. In the middle were more than 10,000 mercenaries and logisticians. Behind them were tens of thousands of civilians. Many of the tasks that the logisticians were supposed to do were done by them. This saved them a lot of manpower, allowing them to follow behind the main forces faster and obtain everything they needed. Back to the main topic, after the division of the 1st Cavalry Division, the speed of their advance was significantly faster. At dawn, 3 regiments of 6,000 cavalry had already arrived at a valley 5 miles outside of Xiba City. At this moment the city gate of Xiba City had not yet opened. In one night they killed nearly 30,000 enemies and broke through 5 blockade lines in a row. Surprisingly, the 1st Cavalry Division did not have a single death and only a few dozen people were slightly injured. After a simple dressing they ate and rested, waiting for the city gate to open to kill. Chapter 9:17. The sky was already bright, and the news of the defeat at the front had yet to reach them. Xiba City had already broken through the 4 gates as usual. Some listless gold-rimmed soldiers also walked towards the city gates, preparing for the day's work. Rumble. The earth suddenly trembled, causing the gold-rimmed soldiers who seemed to have not slept enough to look puzzled. Looking up at the sky, it was still clear and there was no sign of heavy rain. Then where did the thunder come from? Until a soldier inadvertently looked ahead and saw countless black dots in the distance rapidly approaching. He finally couldn't help but shout, "Look! What is that?" After a full 2 breaths of silence, a gold-rimmed soldier was the first to wake up and shouted, "It's the enemy, it's the cavalry, quick! Close the city gates, everyone retreat into the city." It was just that it was too late to think of retreating at this time. As the vanguard, the 1st Cavalry Regiment Taimuel had already brought a group of brothers to the city gates. First there was a long-range attack with bows and arrows. More than 10 soldiers guarding the north gate were killed by the arrows. The cavalry rushed into Xiba City like a torrent, unstoppable. The 2nd Cavalry Regiment will follow and the 3rd Cavalry Regiment will be the last. Remember, after entering the city, close the 4 gates and prohibit anyone from entering or leaving. You must not let anyone go. Spread the news. Division Commander Tian, who rode on his horse and gave the military order. The later the footprints of the 1st Cavalry Division were known to the enemy, the more advantageous it would be for them. Tian, who knew that their advantage was that they were fast enough and their charge was fierce enough. For example, the musketeers still needed to stop and aim at the target when charging, but they didn't need to. They only needed to charge continuously and kill the enemy on the way. But they also had their own disadvantages, and that was, once it involved siege warfare, their strength would be greatly restrained. How to take advantage of the enemy's unpreparedness and kill their way into the enemy's city became something that he needed to plan and consider. The cavalry entered the city, and along the way, anyone who blocked the way was cut in half by the cavalry's sword. This kind of charge that disregarded human lives quickly emptied the roads in the city to ensure that the cavalry could quickly run through the city without any restrictions. It was precisely because they were fast enough that the 2,000 defenders in Jiba City had not yet figured out what had happened. Even the soldiers who had asked for help did not have time to leave the city before they were firmly surrounded, and those who resisted were all killed. Occasionally, some commoners who had already left the city would be caught up by the cavalrymen. Those who refused to return to the city would naturally end up dead. 2 hours later, when it was almost noon, the situation in Jiba City was under control. The people stayed at home and the surrendered soldiers were locked up in the barracks. The management of the entire city fell into the hands of Division Commander Tian Hu. Tell everyone to eat and take the time to rest. We still have to continue our journey. Tian Hu ordered the messenger beside him as he ate the hot dishes prepared by the chefs in the city lord mansion. After noon, the mighty bicycle army finally arrived. As soon as the 4th Division of the Cold Front Division appeared outside the city, the north gate of Jiba City was opened from the inside. A line of cavalry poured out and made a gesture of welcoming them into the city. The 1st Cavalry Division is really fast. With a sigh, Division Commander De Chong led the army into the city. Only half an hour later, the 1st Cavalry Division, who had been properly rested, left the city again. They handed over the management of Jiba City to the 4th Division of the Cold Front Division. In this regard, some of the officers of the 4th Division of the Cold Front Division were naturally unhappy. They were the main force, okay? Now it was like they were logistics troops receiving goods. But they had no choice. They rushed all the way here and even their legs were sore from riding the bicycle. Now that they no longer had the strength to continue fighting outside the city, the name of the vanguard could only be placed on the 1st Cavalry Division. Compared to the 4th Division of the Cold Front Division, which was only a few hours later, 8,000 auxiliary soldiers and 8,000 Lao soldiers rushed to Jiba City early the next morning. Then the management of the city was once again handed over. The 4th Division of the Cold Front Division went straight to Jiging City, another important city of the Phnom Penh dynasty in the south. Jiging City, the main city in the north of the Phnom Penh dynasty. The population was close to 300,000, and there were about 5,000 troops stationed there. According to the rank of the defending general, Zhou Xian was a third-grade general of the Phnom Penh dynasty and had a lot of power. The news of the 5 blockade lines and the capture of Jiba City had not spread back. The defense of Jiging City was also as usual, and there was no increase in strength. General Zhou Xian also did not know that a disaster was about to befall him. He was still in the general's mansion in the city, listening to music and eating as usual. The 1st Cavalry Division, after rushing for half a day and a night, finally arrived 10 miles away from Jiging City before dawn. The cavalry scouts at the front had already sent back news that there was no place to hide the army outside the north of the city. Thus, Division Commander Tian Hu gave the order for everyone to rest at a spot 10 li away from the city to recover their energy and charge into the city with vigor. This is the information sent by the Security Bureau. This is the location of the city lord's mansion. This is the general's mansion. This is the granary. This is the city's warehouse. Tian Hu hurriedly pointed out 7 or 8 very important locations. He then gave the 3 regimental commanders an order. Once they charged into the city, each regiment needed to occupy and control where they needed to occupy. The sky was bright and the gate of Jiging City was wide open. The 1st Cavalry Division 10 miles away launched a charge. Just like in Jiba City, the appearance of the cavalry caught the defenders in the city by surprise. Just like in Jiba City, the cavalry did not even have time to close the city gate. Dozens of bows and arrows pierced through the air, and at the same time the cavalry rushed into the city. Jiging City fell into the enemy's hands. General Zhou Xian was killed for resisting, and the governor and a group of city officials were captured alive. The only regret was that the fire in the city was lit, and the news of the battle here spread out. Let it spread out. We can't kill all the way to the capital of the Golden Bien dynasty quietly. Let's wait for the arrival of the 4th Cold Front Division, and the army will rest here. Tian Hu did not show an angry look on his face. Since it was a sneak attack, they must be prepared to be discovered. They had occupied 2 cities in 2 days, one of which was an important town, and attacked their cavalry team, which was the least good at sieges. This result already made him very satisfied. In the evening, the 4th Cold Front Division was ready to appear. For a moment the 2 armies converged in Jiging City. At this moment, when the division commanders and regimental commanders of both sides sat together, there was no contempt in their eyes like before, only admiration. What Tian Hu and the others admired was the tenacity of the 4th Cold Front Division. They relied on their legs to pedal the bicycle all the way, and they were not left behind even after 12 hours, which was half a day. Just this tenacity alone was enough to make people respect them. What Ling Dechong and the others admired was the drive of the 1st Cavalry Division. Along the way, everywhere they went, it was as if there was no one around. Such an army, such a powerful force, made them respect them from the bottom of their hearts. Division Commander Ling, the news has been leaked. It is probably impossible for us to sneak attack again. Next we will have to rely on you to attack Chuanlong City. Tian Hu talked about the battle in front of them. Since it was a siege, of course the Cold Front Division, which was armed with firearms, would be the main force. Haha, no problem, no problem. Division Commander Tian and the others must be tired from the journey, and the war horses also need to be fed. This battle will depend on the 4th Division's performance. Ling Dechong said with a polite face. In his heart he felt a sense of exultation. Along the way the 1st Cavalry Division had always been ahead of them. This time they could finally perform well. Tian Hu still had a calm face as he replied. Perhaps he understood Ling Dechong's meaning, or perhaps he didn't. However, they were all members of the mercenary army, and there were some jobs that required cooperation. Ling Dechong laughed and left. Tian Hu then said to the soldier beside him, "Inform the 3 regimental commanders to let them and the soldiers rest well. There will be a big battle soon." The 4th Cold Front Division moved quickly. Perhaps they were eager to show off. On the afternoon of the 2nd day, when the 4 auxiliary battalions in charge of receiving the captives arrived, they handed over the mission of guarding Jujing City. Then the army left the city and rushed to Chuanlong City, which was 120 miles away. Standing on the city gate tower, Taimur watched the 4th Cold Front Division leave the city. He couldn't help but ask, "Are we handing over the mission of being the vanguard?" Of course not. But for now rest is the priority. Tian Hu shook his head and then ordered the 3 regimental commanders. The 4th Division of the Cold Front left Orangewell City and used an afternoon to ride to the outskirts of Chuanlong City. Facing the tightly shut city gates, Division Commander Dechong gave the order and the mortars roared, hitting the city walls in the north. A huge hole appeared. A group that had long been prepared at the side sounded the bugle call to charge. 2,000 soldiers rushed out and entered Chuanlong City. The siege was unexpectedly smooth. Ling Dechong, who was standing in the middle of the army, put down his binoculars and shook his head. It seems that the enemy has retreated. This is an undefended city. Could be a trap. A trap? Are you saying that the Gold Border Dynasty wants to lure us in and then catch us in a jar? Hewen immediately realized that his analogy was inappropriate. He quickly shut his mouth. It doesn't sound nice, but that should be what it means. Ling Dechong said casually. If that's the case, then we won't enter the city. We'll find a wide area outside the city and wait. Let's see what tricks they have up their sleeves. The 3rd Regiment Commander Lu Jing snorted. Obviously, he looked down on the little tricks that only 3-year-olds would play. Chapter 9:18. Commander Yi, what do you think? Ling Dechong seemed to value Yi Xingfeng a lot, or maybe he was very democratic. In any case, every time he discussed something he needed everyone to express their opinion. The 4th Commander Yi Xingfeng narrowed his eyes. We can do as Commander Lu says, but if we do that, the enemy will definitely not attack rashly. If that happens, we will lose a chance to kill the enemy. What do you mean? Are we going to jump into a trap even if we know it's one? Is it just to lure the enemy? 3rd Commander Lu Jing saw that Yi Xingfeng was going to reject his suggestion, so his voice carried a trace of doubt. If we want to kill more enemies, then we should jump in. The 6th young master has taught us a lesson. Only by eliminating the enemy's strength to the greatest extent can we establish an invincible foundation. I just don't want to miss a chance to kill the enemy. Sigh, it would be great if Under Heaven's Cavalry Division No. 1 moved with us. With their cooperation, even if it was a trap, we could easily tear a hole in it. Yi Xingfeng said honestly. He had no intention of targeting Commander Lu Zheng. It was just that, in a war, there were differences between the main force and the cooperation. It was normal to have different opinions, but to have grudges because of work was a serious work problem. Long before the battle, Yang Qindong had told them that if they found any grudges between officers of the same rank due to work, the wrongdoer would be severely punished. It was even possible that they would be stripped of their uniform and be expelled from the army. This was just one of Yang Qindong's strategies. It was to prevent disunity between officers. This was because the result of distrust could cause a war to go from victory to defeat. Yi Xingfeng thought of this and didn't want to argue with Lu Zheng. Lu Zheng seemed to have thought of something as well. He didn't argue with Yi Xingfeng and chose to keep quiet. Since he had already expressed his opinion, what to do next would be up to his division commander. Ling Dechong didn't care about the opinions of his subordinates. It was normal to have disagreements at work. Since he was able to take on the role of commander of Lungfeng, there was no problem with his personality. What he was thinking about now was whether he should enter the city or not. Just as Yi Xingfeng had said, once they entered the city, there would naturally be dangers. It was even possible for them to be surrounded. However, if they didn't enter the city, the enemy wouldn't appear. In this way, they wouldn't be able to severely damage the enemy's strength. Once the army enters the city, I don't believe that with the strength of our Cold Front Division, we will be afraid of these Gold Edge soldiers. As for the 1st Cavalry Division, they are too tired from being the vanguard. Let them have a good rest in Orangewell City tonight. Ling Daqiang finally made the decision to enter the city. In his view, in front of great strength, all schemes were useless. This time their 4th Division was going to use their military might and fighting strength to tell the enemy that in front of them, all schemes were like clowns jumping on a beam. They would be useless. The division commander gave the order, and the 2nd, 3rd and 4th regiments as well as the division battalions began to enter Chuanlong City. As soon as they entered the city, they immediately occupied 4 city towers, overlooking everything inside and outside the city from a high vantage point. Lung Feng's 4 divisions entered the city. This scene was discovered by the scouts of Jin Bian dynasty in the distance. Then the news spread. Jin Bian army, who had already retreated from Chuanlong City, and reinforcements from Suing City arrived one after another. They surrounded Chuanlong City from 4 different directions. As expected, it was a trap. Standing on the city tower, Ling Daqiang saw the 30,000-strong army of the Gold Edge dynasty through his binoculars. He even saw the trebuchets and other siege weapons among the enemy troops. Give the order, the soldiers will guard the 4 city towers in company units. The other soldiers should take the time to rest and wait for dawn to counterattack. Ling Daqiang didn't expect the enemy to surround the city. On the contrary, he became excited because of the enemy's appearance. In his view, this would be a counterattack without any suspense, and the final victory would belong to him. However, there was one thing he didn't expect, which was that there was a tactic called the center blossoming. From the moment the warning fireworks were lit on Jujing City, Chuanlong City was ready to abandon the city after receiving the news. This was originally a high-level secret of the Gold Edge dynasty's military. Even the Security Bureau didn't know about it. That was, once the city couldn't be defended, they would abandon it and use the center blossoming to inflict heavy damage on the enemy troops. Then they would win the war. To put it bluntly, they would give up the city first and wait for the enemy to enter the city. Then they would set the city on fire at the right time to interfere with the enemy's arrangement in the city. Then they would work together to eliminate the enemy. And now they were using this method. Taking advantage of the fact that the sky had already darkened by the time the 4 Cold Front Division entered the city, they were unable to carefully investigate the situation within the city. Thus, they were preparing to set Chuanlong City on fire. Of course, the Cold Front Division were not to be trifled with. There was one rule in their training. When they entered a city, the first thing they had to do was to clear all the possible dangers in the city. In fact, they did this, but the direction was a little wrong. They mainly cleared out the mayor's residence in the city. They didn't search the general's residence, the granary, the storehouse, and other important places where the people gathered. After all, there were too many places like this, and it was far from being clear in a short time. Moreover, the Cold Front Division had the 95 style. If someone confronted them face to face, they wouldn't be afraid of anyone or any army. 10 miles north of Chuanlong City, 30,000 Gold Edge dynasty troops were gathered here. The leader was one of the generals of the Gold Edge dynasty, Homo. He was originally a general sent by the dynasty to guard Suing City. This time, after hearing about the incident in Jujing City, he mobilized 10,000 guards in Suing City. In addition, the guards in some nearby cities gathered together with the soldiers who escaped from Chuanlong City. In a very short time, they set up such a pocket and waited for the mercenaries to enter. After the scouts in front of him sent news that the mercenaries had blasted open the north gate of Chuanlong City, he became very nervous. He even regretted not leaving a few thousand people to guard the city. At least he could create a false impression for the mercenaries that Chuanlong City was not intentionally given up by him, but was taken by force. This way the other party could enter the city and trick them. Hamo prayed in his heart that the mercenaries must enter the city. Otherwise, all his preparations would be in vain. Not only that, he might even be accused of giving up on Chuanlong City and retreating without a fight. Amidst his nervousness, time seemed to pass very slowly. When the scouts sent news that the mercenaries had all entered the city, and there were nearly 10,000 of them, Hamo's anxious heart slowly relaxed. Nearly 10,000 enemies were now surrounded by him. With 3 times the number of soldiers and the support of the people in the city, Hamo seemed to see a golden path in front of him. What were mercenaries? Even General Dagon and General Hun Sen had been defeated by such a powerful enemy. If he defeated them, wouldn't that prove that he was more powerful than these 2 generals? At that time, everyone would think highly of him. At that time, wouldn't glory, splendor, and wealth be within reach? Excited, Hamo began to mobilize his troops. Of the 30,000 soldiers under him, 20,000 were sent out, 5,000 to each gate. He wanted to teach the mercenaries a lesson. The outside of Chuanlong City was completely surrounded. Inside the city, Ling Daqiang did not panic in the slightest. At this moment he was only waiting for the enemy to take the initiative to attack. Then he would let the enemy know that in the face of great power, this so-called siege was a joke. Just as Ling Daqiang was waiting for the other party to attack, he suddenly felt the surrounding temperature rise. Then a huge fire shone on his face and his expression turned ugly in an instant. Reporting to Division Commander, many places in the city have been set ablaze, and the fire is spreading rapidly. The 4 commanders ask for instructions. What should we do? Reporting to Division Commander, the fire has spread everywhere, and it is impossible to extinguish it. Moreover, it seems to be surrounding our army. The 4 commanders ask for instructions. Should we break out of the city? Reporting to Division Commander, we must retreat. The fire is about to reach you. Please leave with us. News after news was sent to Ling Daqiang, and he finally figured out what the Phnom Penh army was planning. He thought that he had been very careful, but he did not expect the enemy to be so crazy. The fire started in the residential area first, and many people in the city would be buried with it. Really ruthless. Ling Daqiang sighed and sighed. In order to win, the Phnom Penh army treated the lives of the people like grass. He shook his head and issued a military order, ordering all the troops to withdraw from the north gate. After issuing the order, Ling Daqiang staggered and almost fell to the ground. Forcibly leaving the city in the middle of the night was not a wise move. Although the 4 divisions of the Cold Front were well trained, and there should be no chaos in the army, it was inevitable that they would suffer losses in a hurry. Ling Daqiang, who was supported by the guards, was now thinking of reducing the losses as much as possible. If the 4 divisions were seriously injured because of this, he was afraid that he would not have the face to see the 6th young master and his other comrades. The fire was burning in Chuanlong City, and it was clearly visible from far away. In the middle of the Phnom Penh army, General Hamo laughed. He did not dare to expect that the 30,000 troops could eliminate nearly 10,000 mercenaries, but as long as they could seriously injure them and force them to retreat, it would be a great achievement. Chapter 9:19. The golden path was right in front of him, and it was only a matter of time before he was made a marquis. At this moment, Hamo felt that the air was so fresh and life was so beautiful. However, all of this quickly disappeared. A group of cavalrymen had entered the battlefield at some point in time and were heading straight for the side of his army. Kill. Don't leave a single one alive. Tian, who rode on his horse and waved his 2 swords as he killed his way into the middle of the Phnom Penh army. One by one, the unprepared Phnom Penh soldiers were cut down under their horses. The sudden appearance of the 1st Cavalry Division was completely out of Hamo's expectations. Faced with this sudden attack, the Central Army did not even last half an hour before collapsing. Even more people were scared out of their wits in the face of this murderous god from hell. They did not even have the courage to fight and turned to flee. More and more deserters appeared, and Hubo led the 2nd Regiment to attack from the left flank. Wherever they went, it was like hell on earth, and those who stood in their way were either dead or heavily injured. Their sharp sabers beheaded enemy after enemy, and the morale of the Phnom Penh army was completely crushed. Seeing the heads of the soldiers sent flying in just a few moments, Hamo was also scared out of his wits. He abandoned his army and fled under the protection of some of his personal guards. There's an enemy cavalry unit over there. Chase after them. Hubo led the charge, and after killing a dozen enemies he saw Hamo fleeing and immediately led the 3rd Regiment to chase after him. The 1st and 2nd Regiments also entered the battlefield at this moment, and began their work like reaping machines. Originally, victory was in their grasp, and even victory was right in front of their eyes. However, the sudden appearance of the world's 1st Cavalry Division changed the situation. With Hamo's escape, the Central Army fell into chaos, and the entire army lost a unified commander. When the 4th Regiment of the Cold Front Division retreated from the north gate of Chuanlong City, they did not see the Central Army that was supposed to be gathered here. There were only 5,000 enemies that were supposed to be here. Open fire, exterminate them. There were only 5,000 enemies. The 1st Regiment commander immediately gave the order to counterattack. The 2,000 soldiers of the 1st Regiment took turns to provide cover as they charged towards the 5,000 enemies. The Gold Edge army outside the north gate was very excited when they saw the mercenaries appear. They were waiting for the reinforcements outside the other gates to arrive. Then they could rush forward with their large number of soldiers. As long as they could fight with the mercenaries, the power of the other party's flintlock would be greatly hindered. With their strength they might win the final victory. However, after waiting for a long time, not only did they not see any reinforcements, they instead received a piece of shocking news. The main army had been disrupted by the mercenaries' cavalry, and Hamo had already fled towards Suwing City. Where did the cavalry come from? Or was this simply the mercenaries' plan to beat them at their own game? Thinking that this might be the other party's plan, the 5,000 soldiers of Phnom Penh who were guarding the north gate were in a mess. They thought that they had set a trap and were going to deal with others. Only then did he realize that he was the one who had fallen into the trap. Even so, how could they still dare to stay here and wait for the other party to eat them? Before they could charge, the 5,000 soldiers retreated in chaos. Without any threat, the 1st Regiment quickly steadied themselves. Then the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Regiment, including the last division's battalion, safely withdrew from Chuanlong City. Although they were covered in dust when they left the city, and hundreds of soldiers were slightly burned, no one paid with their lives for this. Most importantly, the army withdrew safely and did not encounter the siege outside the city as they had imagined. The division commander, De Chong, had a puzzled expression. He did not understand what the Gold Edge army was doing. Why did they give up this opportunity to seriously injure him? Did they just set a fire to scare him? Investigate. Send out all the scouts. Find out what's going on. A commander who did not understand the situation on the battlefield was not fit for his job. De Chong felt that he was now blind and had lost his wisdom. Reporting, the world's #1 cavalry division is calling. A telegram appeared at the right time and gave a brief explanation of the situation on the battlefield. Looking at the telegram sent by Tian Hu, he finally understood the situation outside. Da Qiang let out a sigh of relief. Commander Tian called. They have broken through the middle of the Phnom Penh army and are now chasing the enemy generals. They are ready to kill their way into Suwing City. He asked us to eliminate the remaining enemies here as soon as possible and then asked us to meet in Suwing City. After a brief explanation of the situation, De Chong's face was filled with emotions. He had always thought that he could be faster than the enemy, but now it seemed that the credit would be taken by the enemy. But this time he was not jealous. If the enemy had not appeared in time, the 4 divisions of Lung Feng would have been heavily injured. The enemy had saved his life and he had to acknowledge this debt. Every regiment quickly eliminate the enemy. Gather in 4 hours and set off for Suwing City. De Chong used his identity as a division commander to point out the direction for the troops. Sporadic gunshots rang out on the battlefield. Hubo was closely following the dozens of cavalry in front of him. After confirming that the enemy was the Gold Edge general and that they were escaping in the direction of Suwing City, he was no longer in a hurry. He had the soldiers follow behind at a distance of 1 li, neither fast nor slow. Every cavalry member of the 1st Cavalry Division had brought 2 groups of war horses with them. They could switch horses at any time to increase their speed to the maximum and also to maintain their peak condition. Hubo intentionally slowed down. After more than 2 hours, Division Commander Tian, who led the main force, to catch up. When he saw that the 3 regiments were only following closely behind and did not launch a quick attack, Tian, whose usually stern face, actually revealed a smile. Not bad, not bad. Commander who is very considerate. Clearly Tian, who had seen through Hubo's plan to bait the big fish. With the speed of 1 man and 2 horses of the 1st Cavalry Division, it was naturally not difficult for them to catch up to Hamo. However, they did not do so because they wanted to use this person to knock down Suwing City's sturdy gates. News of their appearance had already spread. It was impossible to sneak into the city like before. Cavalry sieges were ultimately a weakness. If they could not sneak in and force their way through, they could only rely on their wits. Hamo was a very good bait. In order to allow the 3 regiments to successfully complete their mission, Tian, who took the initiative to maintain a certain distance, giving them enough space to execute their plan. When Hubo discovered that the main force was not in a hurry to meet up with him, he relaxed. Since his division commander had already understood his intentions, he would just have to perform well. General Hamo, who was running at the front, would occasionally turn back to look. When he discovered that the distance between the 2 sides was always about 1 li, he finally let out a sigh of relief. Reality had proven that the difference in speed between the 2 sides was not much. This 1 li distance would be his chance of survival. It was supposed to be a night of harvesting the fruits of their victory, but Hammer had been running all night. Around noon the next day, the gates of Suwing City finally appeared in his line of sight. At that moment he felt like crying. Everyone, your blood will not be shed in vain. I will take care of your families. Right now, this general orders you to bring up the rear and buy time for me to enter the city. When they were 4 li away from the tightly shut gates of Suwing City, Hamo revealed his true appearance and ordered his personal guards to bring up the rear. Behind them was the 1st Cavalry Division. If they stayed behind, they would undoubtedly die. But even if Hamo gave the order, if they disobeyed, they would still die. Moreover, their families would not be taken care of. At this moment, the dozens of bodyguards revealed pained expressions on their faces. General, you must do as you say. I'll leave my mother in your care. General, my son is still young. I hope you can take care of him for a few more years and help him grow up. General, my father's health is not good. The personal guards spoke to Hamo as if they were leaving behind their last words. Then, when they were 1 li away from the gates, the several dozen riders stopped and turned their horses around, preparing to fight to the death and buy time for the general to enter the city. Hamo nodded one by one. He would agree to any request made by his personal guards, but only he knew whether he would really do it. His personal guards stayed behind to bring up the rear. He rode alone to the northern gates of Suwing City and shouted at the top of the city tower, "I am General Hamo. I have important military intelligence to report. Open the gates immediately and let me in." "General, the enemy is behind you. It's too dangerous to open the gates now." A centurion guarding the city looked at the unidentified cavalrymen who were only a mile away from the city gate and said while spinning his legs, "If you can't report this important intelligence to the king, then you will all die. All of you will die. I order you to open the gates now. Hurry." Hamo did not care. He had fled for an entire night and half a day, sacrificing all of his personal guards, all for the sake of his life. To achieve this goal, he had constantly roared and threatened. Hamo's rank in the army was very high. Now that he had given the order, the centurion was forced to open the gates, since there was no general guarding Suwing City. As the gates opened bit by bit, Hamo's face was filled with excitement. When he thought about how he could finally live, he happily turned around. When he turned around, he immediately felt his soul leaving his body. 2 of his 3 souls were gone. He did not know when, but the several dozen personal guards he had left behind had already turned into corpses lying on the ground. The enemy cavalry behind him was less than an arrow's throw away. "Open the gates. Open the gates. Hamo's thirst for life made him shout loudly. At that moment, as if the heavens had heard his prayers, the gates finally opened halfway, allowing a cavalry to enter. Chapter 9:20. Ha. Just as Hammer was about to enter, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his back. When he looked down, he saw a sharp arrow protruding from the left side of his chest. His expression quickly froze, and with a plop, Hammer fell off his horse. It was Hubo who shot the arrow. After severely injuring Hamo with an arrow, he was the first to arrive at the city gate. With a swing of his saber, a gold-rimmed soldier who was about to close the gate was cut down to the ground. The city gate was half opened, giving the remaining cavalrymen an opening to enter. They were like great white sharks that had smelled blood and took the opportunity to enter. Men, tie this man up. Thinking that he had captured the enemy's general alive, Hubo ordered his men to take him down. Then he and the others pushed the half-open gate open completely. At this moment, Tian, who arrived with the 1st and 2nd regiments. The army successfully entered the city. The bravery of the cavalry was not something the gilded border soldiers could resist. With the speed of the war horses, the front of the gate was soon littered with corpses. The mercenaries had entered the city. As soon as the news spread, the gilded border soldiers at the other gates fled madly. At this moment they only wished their parents had given them 2 more legs. The officials of the gilded border dynasty who were in charge of the defense of Suing City all fled when they heard that the mercenaries had suddenly entered the city. Some even left their families behind, hoping to escape with their lives. No one would have thought that a strategic location like Suing City, the gateway to the capital of the gilded border dynasty, would be given up just like that. There was not even a decent resistance. As it turned out, the speed of the 1st Cavalry Division's attack exceeded everyone's expectations. Tian, who entered the city and quickly took over the 4 gates, as well as the granaries and storehouses. They did not act rashly. There were tens of thousands of soldiers and hundreds of thousands of civilians in the city. They only had 6,000 people. If something unexpected happened, the weakness of their forces would be exposed. It might even lead to a strong counterattack. Guard the 4 gates and the important places. Don't worry about the other places. Just let them do whatever they want. The commander gave the order, and the cavalry naturally followed it. As a result, the people in the city were the ones who suffered. When the Phnom Penh troops, who were afraid of death and had just fled to various parts of the city, found that the mercenaries did not launch a large-scale search and massacre, they did not think about how to rush out of the city, but how to burn, kill, and loot during this unregulated time. Everyone had their own selfish desires, and they also had a dark side to them. Usually, because of the strict management, they had to be self-disciplined. Most people didn't dare to show it. But now it was different. The law that was weighing on their heads had disappeared. They didn't even see a single person in charge. They had become completely free people and could do whatever they wanted. As a result, it was inevitable that the army would loot the civilians. The thugs on the streets would loot the civilians. Even the younger and stronger men would form groups of 3 to 5 to loot the civilians. The wealthy families in the city who didn't manage to escape in time couldn't avoid becoming the first targets. Suing City was in chaos, and there were sounds of fighting and killing everywhere. Who knew how many commoners had suffered an undeserved calamity? Their family's only wealth had been rummaged through and taken away. The young women in the family, or those who were slightly more beautiful, had also become the targets of the robbery. Cries and shouts could be heard incessantly, begging for mercy and complaining. On the streets, one could often see groups of robbers running back and forth. Sometimes, they would even engage in internal strife due to the uneven distribution of the spoils. The sounds of swords clashing were also incessant. Standing on top of the 4 city towers, one could roughly see what was happening in the city center. Tian, who called the 3 commanders to inquire about the situation. But when it came to the civil strife in the city, no one mentioned it. This kind of internal strife was beneficial to the mercenaries. More importantly, after this internal strife, the people here hated the bandits far more than they hated them. Moreover, the mercenaries could enter in the name of suppressing the bandits and take the wealth that originally belonged to the people from the bandits openly. They didn't have to worry about being criticized by others or being pressured by public opinion. Half a day later, the 4th Division of the Lung Feng Army entered Suing City. A day later, the first batch of 4 battalions of auxiliary soldiers entered the city. 2 days later, Yang Qindong arrived in Suing City under the protection of 1,000 guards. Along with him were 10 battalions of auxiliary soldiers and 5,000 Lao army soldiers. Their strength continued to grow. After 4 days of looting, Suing City was in chaos. On the streets, there were women and old people who had been killed as well as men who had killed each other. The doors of some houses were wide open, indicating that they had experienced an inhumane robbery and that their houses had nothing on them. It's time to end this. Pass the order down, reel in the net. Anyone who resists, kill. Yang Qindong stood on top of the southern city tower, looking at the burning Suing City and said with a hint of anger. This scene was not out of Yang Qindong's expectations. Perhaps this was part of human nature. Before the war, Yang Qindong had thought of all sorts of possibilities. He even thought that after this battle the Kim Bian dynasty would suffer heavy losses. But this was war, a game where either you die or I live. There was a saying that mercy to the enemy was cruelty to oneself. Since Yang Qindong already knew about the story of the farmer and the snake, he would not let it happen again. Otherwise, in the near future the ones who would die would be the Han people. As the saying goes, if I don't go to hell, who will? For the sake of the Han people, for the sake of dignity, for the sake of the future generations, some sacrifices were necessary. It was like a person eating a bun. Not only could he eat meat but he could also eat noodles. War was the same. The army of the enemy forces must be destroyed, and the people of the enemy forces must also be affected. This was inevitable. I hope the world can be peaceful in the future. After today's battle, Yang Qindong didn't dare to hope that there would be no more wars in this world, but at the very least it could last for a few more years. It could give the people more time to live in peace and a better environment. It could also let them know that life was actually very beautiful. Send a message to Yang and ask him to persuade the Kim Bian royal family to surrender. If there is no news after 2 days, we will launch a new round of attacks. The attack was so smooth, especially the excellent performance of the 1st Cavalry Division, which was somewhat beyond Yang Qindong's expectations. Now it was time to force the other party to surrender. Kim Bian City, the capital of the Kim Bian dynasty. The news of the mercenary army's invasion and the capture of Jiba, Orange Well, Chuanlong, and Suing cities spread throughout Kim Bian City. For a time the people were in a panic and the social order began to be chaotic. More than a year ago the Kim Bian dynasty had experienced such a war. But fortunately the foundation was good. Although some aspects of work had not been fully restored after the war, at least the lives of the people were still guaranteed. And this time the scale of the army was obviously larger than the previous one. The experienced merchants in the city immediately began to hoard goods. For a time, the price of rice in Kim Bian had become so expensive that the people at the bottom had no food to eat. Even the ordinary people were facing the possibility of starvation at any time. The regime of the Kim Bian dynasty was still there, so it was naturally impossible for there to be civil strife like in Suing City. However, there was already chaos on the streets. For this reason the city guards were dispatched twice to arrest some people. But this was just a temporary solution. When the people had no food to eat, even if they knew that they would be beheaded, they would still rebel. In the palace, King Boromir was sitting high, discussing countermeasures with his ministers. Compared to usual, Boromir's face was obviously anxious at this moment. This time the mercenaries had gone to war without declaring war. Not only did it violate the rules but it also caught him off guard. Based on the battle reports, the mercenaries had sent out very elite troops. It was not like the intelligence report said that they used the local army like Laos. What are you doing? What are you doing? Drag them out and behead them in public. As soon as the meeting began, Boromir did not hide the anger in his heart. The first person to be executed was the official in charge of the intelligence department. Because he did not give a warning in time, he became the first high-ranking official to be beheaded. Cries for help and cries of injustice echoed in the hall. The official in charge of the intelligence department had already been dragged out. Not long after, there were no more cries. It was obvious that he was dead. For a moment, many of the ministers' faces were very ugly. The king was really angry. At this moment, if he said something wrong, it was very likely that he would bring about an unexpected disaster. Boromir's emotions didn't ease up even after killing the soldiers. His eyes flickered as he looked at the ministers and said in a hoarse voice, Nearly 100,000 soldiers were completely defeated in just a few days. Most of them were killed or captured, and the cities were lost one after another. Who can answer me? Why is this so? Also, what do you mean by the city's impregnable defense? Who can explain? In the face of the king's anger, many of the ministers lowered their heads. Everyone knew the strength of the Phnom Penh army. It was not a problem to frighten the ordinary people. However, it was not on the same level as the elite mercenaries. Not to mention, the mercenaries had launched a surprise attack. They were not prepared at all. It was normal for such an outcome to happen. What they were thinking about now was what the mercenaries were after this time. Should it be the same deterrence as last time? Or should it be more beneficial? Or did they really want to annex the entire Phnom Penh dynasty, just like how they had annexed the Jiaoxi and Lonsong kingdoms? Chapter 921. At this moment, the ministers realized that they still knew too little about the mercenaries' appetites and strength. They couldn't make the right judgment and naturally didn't know what to say. The ministers kept their mouths shut, and the palace was so silent that one could hear a pin drop. King Boromir was furious and shouted, "What? Are you all mute? Weren't they all good at talking when they were fighting for power and profit? Why aren't you speaking now? Speak to this prince, otherwise all of you will be thrown into the prison. Speak." Since Boromir was angry, the ministers couldn't remain silent. Right Prime Minister Dun stood at the head of the crowd. He felt that the time was right and was the first to step forward. "Your Majesty, I have something to say." "Right Prime Minister, speak." Boromir's eyes lit up when he saw Dun step forward. "Your Majesty, the mercenaries' representative Mr. Yunk has arrived at Golden Rim City and is now in my residence. He brought the latest news of the great Ming dynasty's Duke Shongwei and requested to meet with your Majesty." Dun looked up at Boromir and said. After he finished speaking, he lowered his head, his eyes focused on his nose, and his nose focused on his heart. He was as silent as a monk. He knew what kind of consequences he would face after saying those words. However, he knew that he would be fine. This was because he represented peace talks. Although this was not the king's first choice, it was still a path of retreat. Unless the mercenaries were defeated, no one would give up this path of retreat so easily. This was where the king's survival lay. Sure enough, after saying this, Dun was immediately attacked by all kinds of people. What traitor? What traitor? What spy? All sorts of accusations were thrown at him. At this moment, the officials were furious. It was as if anyone who did not open their mouths to scold Dwayne might be Dwayne's accomplice. Among them, left Prime Minister Ding Dingwei was the most enthusiastic. The last time the mercenaries came, he suffered a lot because he misjudged the situation. Fortunately, he was experienced enough and had the king's trust, so he was able to retain his position. However, since then he was obviously at a disadvantage when fighting with the right prime minister. After becoming the minister of the left, Ding Dingwei's wisdom was needless to say. He quickly went into hiding and waited for an opportunity to counterattack. Now that the opportunity presented itself, he would not let it go. He began to scold Dun. When he felt tired, he saluted Boromir and said, "Your Majesty, Dun's heart is no longer with the Golden Bien dynasty. He is clearly a spy for the mercenaries, a spy. This subject requests your Majesty to give the order to kill him, and then surround the right Prime Minister's residence. Capture the mercenary representative Yunk and behead him in public." "Your Majesty, please give the order to kill Dun and the mercenary representative." The courtiers replied in unison, their expressions solemn as if they had some sort of life and death feud with Dun and Skylark. Boromir did not look pleased at the unity of his subordinates. He knew that these officials were just worried that he would make an example out of them. Now that they had another target to vent their anger on, they wanted to divert the conflict. What Dun did really annoyed him. He secretly communicated with the mercenaries without a decree. How could a loyal official do such a thing? For this reason, it wouldn't be too much to teach him a lesson, but there was no need to kill him. According to the reports from the front lines, the mercenaries had occupied Su Wing City for several days and had no intention of attacking. He could use this opportunity to mobilize his troops, but if he killed the other party's messenger, it would be forcing the mercenaries to be ruthless, which would be equivalent to slapping himself in the face, and he would not do such a thing. It was precisely because Dun had grasped the king's mentality that he was able to say these things without fear. Now that the courtiers had shouted their request, they only needed to wait for Boromir's answer. At this moment, Dun raised his head and looked at their high and mighty king. Well, why don't we kill the messenger when two countries are at war? Everyone wants me to kill the messenger. Isn't that making this king unjust? Men, go to the right prime minister's residence and bring the messenger of the mercenaries here. Boromir finally made his decision and pretended to reprimand his subordinates. Many of the courtiers immediately shut their mouths. They had no intention of going against the right prime minister, but the situation was like this. If they did not stand up, it would be easy for them to be punished. They were just following the crowd and shouting their slogans. As for the final decision, it was up to His Majesty to make. Now that the decision was made, many courtiers wisely shut their mouths. Only the left prime minister, Ding Ding Wei, continued to shout. Your Majesty, we can meet the messenger, but Dun is indeed suspected of being in cahoots with foreign countries. He must be severely punished. Otherwise, if everyone follows suit, wouldn't the country be in chaos? Alright, left prime minister, this king understands everything. Let's talk about it after we meet the messenger. Boromir interrupted Ding Ding Wei's request. He really wanted to figure out the purpose of this mercenary group, and before he had an answer he wouldn't act rashly. The hall became quiet again. After about half an hour, the sound of footsteps finally came from outside the hall. The king's guards appeared, and behind them was a middle-aged man in Han Chinese clothes. His face was calm and his eyes were spirited. He walked forward step by step and stood between the two rows of officials. Courtier Yunk greets your Majesty and sends his greetings. You don't have to be so courteous. Boromir suppressed his anger and appeared very calm. After all, he was the king of a country. He could not lose his composure so easily. Thank you, your Majesty. Skylark, who had no intention of greeting Boromir, immediately raised her head and smiled at Boromir. At this moment, Boromir also looked at the other party's face. After 2 breaths of time, Boromir was the first to feel uncomfortable. He gently tilted his head to the side and said, this time the Duke of Loyalty didn't even give a greeting before dispatching his troops. He killed 100,000 soldiers and nearly 1 million civilians. He robbed my city and plundered my wealth. This kind of bandit behavior is shameful. Does the envoy have any explanation for this? Your Majesty is wrong. The Duke of Loyalty sent his troops to the south because you tore up the friendly trade agreement. You stationed your troops at the border and blocked the trade route. We were only passive and took the initiative to strike first. Yunk was already prepared for this, so he did not hesitate to answer. Passive and took the initiative to strike first? Ah, what a joke. Boromir looked up to the sky and laughed to express the anger in his heart. This was simply unreasonable, but he also knew that he was now the weaker party, and there was no point in continuing to argue. In Suing City, 300 miles away from Golden Rim City, the mercenaries might be ready to go. Now was not the time to reason but to find out what the other party's purpose was. Soon after, Boromir stopped laughing. When he looked at Skylark, he regained his composure. Emissary, why don't you tell me what your Duke of Loyalty wants? Okay. Yunk replied. He then raised his head and said in an incomparably serious tone, the Duke of Loyalty said that the Golden Rim dynasty has gone back on its words and there is no need for it to exist. Now the only way out is to surrender. The Duke of Loyalty can guarantee everyone's safety. He can even protect part of everyone's personal wealth. Shut up, bastard. Left Prime Minister Ding Ding Wei finally couldn't help but reprimand him. He raised his right hand and pointed at Yunk, saying, your Duke of Loyalty wants to annex my Golden Rim dynasty. He needs to have the strength and appetite to do so. Haha, you must be the left Prime Minister. You will soon know if the Duke of Loyalty has such an appetite. Look at your 100,000 troops in several major cities. Didn't you lose them in just a few days? How many of such troops in major cities do you have? How many times can you withstand the attacks of the mercenaries? By the way, there's one thing I forgot to tell everyone. The Duke of Loyalty has already given an order. He will give you 2 days to surrender. Otherwise, you will know what it means to be under the pressure of a large army and what it means to be in despair. Shut up. Seeing Yunk boasting so shamelessly at this time, Ding Ding Wei roared angrily. He then turned to Boromir and said, "Your Majesty, this person was disrespectful to you in the hall. I would like to ask you to punish him for disrespect and behead him in public." Ding Dingwei wanted to kill Yun Kai, but the person who was about to be killed had a calm expression on his face. It was as if he did not hear those words. His face was still incomparably calm, as if what they were talking about had nothing to do with him. Skylark's calm demeanor made Boromir gnash his teeth in anger. However, he knew that Skylark couldn't die just yet. Just as Right Prime Minister Du En had thought, this would be a way out for him. Unless he could gain the upper hand, he couldn't casually kill the messenger sent by the Duke of Loyalty. That would create a life-and-death feud. On the contrary, not only could he not kill Yunk, but he also had to protect him. At least before the overall situation was settled, nothing could happen to this person. The Right Prime Minister is suspected of colluding with a foreign country. However, due to insufficient evidence, he is now relieved of all his duties. Go home and wait for orders. Messenger, please stay in the mansion with the Right Prime Minister. This king will consider your request. Sure enough, there was no killing, only house arrest. This result was within the expectations of many people. Right Minister Dun and Emissary Yunk were already prepared. When they heard this decree, they didn't argue or refute it. Instead, they cupped their fists and the two of them walked down the hall. Chapter 922. When they left the hall, Minister Ding Dingwei's voice was still echoing, "Your Majesty, you can't let them go." Boromir did not reply immediately. He watched them leave. Then he said, "How can I let them go? Keeping them alive will only numb the loyalty of the Duke of Valor and the mercenaries. Minister, let me ask you, if we gather the entire country's army to fight the mercenaries, what is the outcome?" Boromir was about to start a war. Ding Dingwei calmed himself down and said, "There are too many borders between Phnom Penh and Laos. We can't mobilize the troops guarding the eastern cities. Otherwise, if the mercenaries attack from there, the consequences will be unimaginable. In this way, the only army that can be mobilized is the 200,000 soldiers near the royal city. However, according to the information we received, the mercenaries only have a few tens of thousands of people, and the elite strength is less than 20,000. With 200,000 against 20,000, even if it's a battle of attrition, we can still exhaust them to death." Good. King Boromir was waiting for this. It was almost impossible for him to surrender. At least he would not surrender before the battle was over. Ding Dingwei was also a little excited. What he needed to do now was to encourage the king. Otherwise, if the king of a country was about to admit defeat, what would the people below be able to do? "Your Majesty, we can put in 200,000 soldiers on the battlefield. As long as we can stop the enemy's attack, Siam and Ava will not sit back and do nothing. When their reinforcements arrive, it will be time for us to counterattack with all our might. If it's possible, the capital can start conscripting soldiers right now and mobilize the entire country. We have more than 4 million citizens, so it's possible for us to gather an army of a few 100,000. As long as Your Majesty opens the national treasury, as long as there is money, it will be easy." Ding Dingwei, who was getting more and more excited, seemed to have thought of something and continued, "Your Majesty, our intelligence department reported that in Dragon River City, a fire burned hundreds of thousands of our citizens, causing the entire Dragon River City to be plunged into misery and suffering. Once the mercenaries' actions are spread out, it will definitely attract the support of the citizens of the country. At that time, we can use the power of the country to block the mercenaries' iron hooves. Victory will eventually belong to us." Good. We will do as you say. However, we need to be careful about the recruitment of new soldiers. After all, the war is imminent. Even if these people join the army, they will not be able to form an effective fighting force in a short time. How about this? Let the officials and merchants in the capital take out some money and try to recruit some new soldiers. We will decide after we see how the situation goes." Boromir agreed to all of Ding Dingwei's requests. He even gave him the command of the army. However, he had a different opinion on the recruitment of new soldiers. Saying that the new recruits were weak was just an excuse. In the end, Boromir did not want to use the money in the national treasury. From this, it could be seen that as the king, he did not have high hopes for this battle. No matter how dangerous the situation was, as long as he had money, he would have a chance to rise again. Left Prime Minister Ding Dingwei naturally saw through this point. But he did not raise any doubts about this matter. Rice had to be eaten one bite at a time. First, they had to decide on the idea of going to war. As for the matter of recruiting new soldiers, it was inevitable. As long as there was hope for victory, presumably the king would make the right choice. The court session came to an end. Ding Dingwei was given power and the army and local affairs were handed over to him. Orders were given out as the armies gathered and surrounded Su Wing City from the vicinity of the royal capital. At some point, a rumor had spread in the city that the mercenaries were extremely cruel and had burned down Chuanlong City. The hundreds of thousands of people in the city had either died or been injured. The tens of thousands of gold-edged soldiers in the city had also suffered heavy losses. Commander Hamo had died heroically while protecting the civilians as they retreated. Once this news came out, it immediately aroused the hatred of many people. Many people began to look for ways to serve the country and resist the enemy. It was at this time that the officials and merchants of the royal capital began to donate money and goods. The leader was Ding Dingwei. In order to raise more money and goods, he had sold an ancestral property in the royal capital. With him taking the lead, the other ministers and the merchants who were inextricably linked to them had no choice but to cough up some blood. Naturally, there was no lack of people who were stingy. But soon some people were arrested and imprisoned for various crimes. This was Ding Dingwei's counterattack. He wanted to make an example out of them. And with such examples, the officials and merchants became more proactive in donating money and goods. Gold Edge City was making preparations for the counterattack under Ding Dingwei's command. But no matter how hard they tried, 2 days of preparation was far from enough in the face of a war. For this matter, Ding Dingwei went to the palace, hoping to have more time to prepare. King Boromir immediately agreed, and then sent someone to Dun's house to inform Skylark that they were considering and studying the issue of whether to surrender the mercenaries or not. But it was impossible to reach a consensus in a short time, so they needed more time to prepare. He also hoped that Skylark could inform the Duke of Loyalty to suspend all military operations. Okay, I got it. Skylark's face was calm, not showing the slightest excitement when the other party said that they were considering the issue of surrender. After the messenger left, Dun looked at Skylark nervously. Mr. Yun, you don't really think that my king will surrender to your mercenaries, do you? Why not? Skylark sat back on the chair and gently sipped the hot tea with a faint smile on his face. Mr. Yun, although we are under house arrest and can't get out, we can still hear some of the movements on the streets. Now that the entire King's City is preparing to fight against the mercenaries, this is clearly the sign of a great war. The so-called surrender is just a temporary measure to buy time. Dwayne said with a tense expression. It was true that Dun was the right prime minister of the Golden Bien dynasty. However, with the appearance of Skylark and the conditions of the deal, he boarded the mercenary ship. He had already made his stand clear in the court. Now there was no way out. Next, unless the Gold Edge dynasty was really destroyed, otherwise no matter where he lived in the future he might face the possibility of revenge at any time. So if one had to say who was more nervous about the situation now, it was not Skylark but Dun. Skylark saw that Dun was so anxious, but his smile did not diminish. Sir Du's words are indeed for the sake of the mercenaries. Here I would like to express my gratitude to you. Hey, we're all family. There's no need to thank me. Dun's face showed a pretentious expression, but in his heart, these words were very effective. He did not know why he believed Skylark's words so easily. At first he regretted it. However, the front line of the war continued to send in news about the mercenaries' continuous victories and the Gold Edge army's continuous failures and retreats. He suddenly felt a little fortunate that his choice did not seem to be wrong. He thought that if the mercenaries really captured the Gold Edge dynasty like they did to Jiaoji and Kanglin Kingdom, although he could not be a minister in the court, he would be able to get the position of the president of the Gold Edge Region's Business Association, plus 200,000 taels of silver as a reward. Compared to those ministers who lost their countries, his treatment was quite good. After making up his mind to follow the mercenaries, Dun reminded Skylark to prevent the other party from playing any tricks. Skylark laughed and said, I just said that I know everything. But since Boromov did not make the decision to surrender, the attack after 2 days will not stop. Oh, now there should be 1 day left. Oh. Skylark's answer made Dun stunned at first, then he laughed. Yes, knowing did not mean that he would agree. It was just an attitude of returning the news. It seemed that this time the mercenaries would not stop until they had swallowed the Gold Edge dynasty. At this moment, Dun's worries disappeared. Unaware of the problem in Skylark's answer, Borimov sent someone to inform the left Prime Minister Ding Dingwei after hearing the reply of the minister who sent the right Prime Minister back. He said that the mercenaries should not launch any attacks in a short period of time, but he had to prepare faster. It would be best if they could win a big battle in Suing City first. It would boost the morale of the people and at the same time, give them more initiative in the following negotiations. Ding Dingwei, who received the king's order, did not dare to be negligent. He immediately ordered General Hun Sen, one of the generals, to lead 50,000 troops to Suing City as the vanguard. There were still 50,000 troops from various places waiting there. When the 100,000 troops were in front of the road, perhaps there would be good news. Ding Dingwei wanted to tell the mercenaries that this time, the Gold Edge dynasty was ready for a decisive battle. If they must fight, then they would accompany them to the end. It was still unknown who would win and who would lose. At that time the mercenaries would be deeply involved. At that time if the Siam kingdom and the Awa kingdom took the opportunity to make trouble in the rear of Laos, it would not be easy for the mercenaries to retreat safely. Ding Dingwei had planned everything very well. As long as he had enough time with the support of His Majesty, he could confront the mercenaries. The outcome would be full of suspense. Once he defeated the mercenaries, his reputation would be unparalleled. In the future, history would have a fair evaluation of him, and it was even possible that it would be full of praise. Chapter 923. However, all of this changed with the arrival of a piece of news on the next day. At dusk on the second day, a piece of news that no one in Golden Rim City expected was heard. Just this morning, the mercenaries' ships suddenly fired cannons at the southern port of the Golden Rim dynasty. Under the bombardment, the defenses of the port were completely destroyed. Half an hour later, the mercenaries began to disembark and occupied the entire port. The Golden Rim dynasty's navy general, Bamboo, was killed in battle. Now the army was spreading towards the southern White Horse region. In other words, after Suing City in the north, the war in the south had also begun. And it was sweeping over at a very fast speed. Ever since the first request for help was received at dusk, there would be another request for help every half an hour. The South was in danger. At this time they finally understood the reason for the 2-day deadline. But didn't he greet Skylark before and the other party also gave him an answer? Minister Ding Dingwei was urgently summoned to the palace. He looked at King Boromir and asked with a puzzled expression. Your Majesty, when you sent someone to ask Skylark, what did he say? He said he knew. Doesn't that mean he admitted it? Boromir was puzzled. But, Your Majesty, we were fooled by them. He only said he knew. He didn't say they would stop attacking. Ding Dingwei's expression changed after thinking for a while. What? He dared to lie to me? Does he want to die? Boromir gnashed his teeth in anger. He clenched his fists tightly, but he still didn't make up his mind to kill Skylark. There was no other way. The mercenaries had the upper hand in the current situation. He couldn't act rashly. Your Majesty, the only thing we can do now is not to blame anyone. The war in the south will soon spread to the royal city. We have to find a way to stop them. Why don't we open the treasury and recruit new soldiers? Ding Dingwei once again wanted to open the treasury. Boromir wanted to nod at this moment, but he thought that there was still a way. He shook his head and said, We have to recruit new soldiers, but I'm afraid it's too late. Isn't there still 150,000 soldiers in the royal city that haven't arrived in the north? Why don't we mobilize 100,000 soldiers to reinforce the southern front first, and then we can recruit more soldiers? At this time Boromov still did not want to use his capital. Tintinwai wanted to persuade him again, but considering the urgency of the military situation, he could only nod and say, Yes, then we will do as your Majesty wishes. The northern front did not have enough soldiers to begin with, and the situation forced them to send another 100,000 soldiers to the southern front. For a short period of time, the northern front would not have any reinforcements. However, General Hun Sen, who was leading 50,000 troops to Suing City, didn't know about this. At this moment he was still fantasizing about whether he could make the first contribution. There were already reports that the main force of the mercenaries this time was only around 15,000 people. The moment he received the news, Hun Sen was even wondering if the news was true. Based on the previous battle results, they had already lost 100,000 soldiers. If that was the case, then what were the 100,000 people doing? He was actually beaten by more than 10,000 people to the point where he couldn't even fight back? No matter what, this time we have to turn defeat into victory. We have to make the first contribution. How about this? Order the army to speed up. Don't let the mercenaries deal a heavy blow to our army. If that happens, we won't have any advantage in numbers. Hun Sen looked at the map in his hand and then looked at the speed of the army with an anxious expression. It was only a distance of 300 li, and the army had already traveled for 2 days. They hadn't even covered half of the distance. Although he was leading infantrymen, this speed was too slow. After the general gave the order, the 50,000 soldiers sped up and rushed towards Suing City. At this moment, after 7 days of chaos, Suing City finally calmed down. This was because Yang Qindong's strategy was good. Using civilians to fight civilians. This was something that no one had ever done before and no one had ever thought of it. But it worked in his hands. When the civilians of Ding City, Jiba City, Jiging City, and Chuanlong City came to Suing City to help the mercenaries with transportation, Yang Qindong gave an order to the more than 100,000 civilians who followed them. He asked them to persuade the people in the center of Suing City that as long as they surrendered, their lives would no longer be in danger. Not only that, if they were willing to work for the mercenaries such as transporting spoils and supplies, carrying the wounded, persuading people to surrender, cleaning up the battlefield, burying the bodies of the dead soldiers and so on, they would be paid silver. No one would feel bad about money. Especially the civilians who followed the mercenaries at the beginning. They found that as long as they were obedient, the mercenaries would never beat or scold them. They would even nod when they met to show their friendliness. This was a treatment and respect that the Gilded Dynasty's army didn't give them. But now the mercenaries gave them this treatment. Because of this, they could be respected and treated as human beings. Plus the considerable amount of silver, everyone's heart began to lean towards the mercenaries. The civilians were originally simple, they were the people who knew what was good and bad. As long as someone was good to them, they would be good to them in return. On the contrary, even if they were of the same race, if they were oppressed, they would also stand up and resist. More than 100,000 civilians received benefits from the mercenaries, and after they entered Suing City, their role was fully played. Since they were all civilians, they had more in common. Under their word of mouth, many civilians were persuaded, some troublemakers were arrested, and the public security in the city was improved. The auxiliary soldiers also solved the problem of feeding the civilians by opening the granaries and other methods. Whether it was public security or order in Suing City, it was restored to the right track. From the moment the civilians entered the city, the chaos in the city was restored to order in just 2 days. Looking at this result, many people admired Yang Qindong even more. Beta Persei also flattered him more than once. Young master, I admire you when it comes to fighting, but Beta Persei admires you even more when it comes to governing. It seems that there is nothing in the world that can stop you. You are really the reincarnation of an immortal, you are really… Okay. One would vomit after listening to too much flattery. Although Beta Persei was speaking from the bottom of his heart, Yang Qindong still interrupted him and asked, "The 1st Cavalry Division and the 4th Division of the Cold Front have rested enough, right? They have rested for a long time. These days they didn't have to worry about the things in the city. They were just resting. Haha, young master, Division Commander Tian and Division Commander Ling have come to you several times and asked to fight." Beta Persei chuckled. "Then young master, I will give them a chance now. Tell them that there are 50,000 enemies outside the city. How to deal with them will be up to the 2 division commanders. This young master will not participate." Yang Qindong nodded. Previously they had conquered several cities and defeated more than 100,000 enemies. It was easy to say, but in fact it was just a matter of speed against speed, so many soldiers didn't get a good rest. Taking advantage of the chaos in Suing City, he gave the 2 divisions enough time to rest. Now that the blade was almost sharpened, it was time to unsheath it. After Yang Qindong gave the order, the 4th Division of the Cold Front and the 1st Cavalry Division left the city after dinner. It was obvious that they were going to launch a night attack again. Due to a lack of nutrition, the ancient armies often suffered from night blindness. This caused them to be at a disadvantage when marching or fighting at night. However, the mercenaries were different. Their nutrition was always balanced. With Crimson City as their base, they didn't lack money. Not only did they not suffer from night blindness, but because of their frequent night training, they were extremely proficient in night battles. So that night, the two divisions, which added up to less than 15,000 people, launched a fierce counterattack against the Golden Edge Army stationed 10 miles in front of Suing City. When the sound of guns and cannons rang out, the 50,000 unprepared Golden Edge Army was hit hard. Although they had sent out night guards in front of the fierce attack of the two elite divisions, they could not withstand a single blow. The 50,000 soldiers were defeated separately. When the next day dawned, the ground was full of their corpses as well as all kinds of weapons and provisions thrown everywhere. It was time to use the common people again. With the addition of the 300,000 people in Suing City, more than 400,000 people rushed out and the battlefield was quickly cleaned up. Those who were slow even left the city empty-handed and returned empty-handed. This was the power of the common people. As long as they were serious and willing to work hard, there was nothing they couldn't do. 50,000 enemies were either killed or captured within a short period of time, and only about 5,000 managed to escape. 90% of them were chased down by the two main divisions early in the morning. In the end, less than 500 of them managed to escape. It was these people who escaped that bumped into General Hun Sen's army that was rushing to Suing City, and then the news of the front line's defeat spread. The originally valiant and high-spirited Golden Edge Army's morale was suddenly hit hard. The army had no choice but to stop 100 miles away from Suing City. In the main tent, Hun Sen was interrogating the deserters, and then his roar came from the main tent. "What? You're saying that 50,000 soldiers were wiped out in one night? And they chased you all the way without any intention of stopping? But the news said that the other side only had about 15,000 people. How did they do it? And don't they need to clean up the battlefield? Now that the weather is warm with so many corpses left outside, there will be a plague." Chapter 924. It was no wonder that Hun Sen did not believe them. 10,000 men could defeat 50,000 men, but what were they going to do next? The battlefield was too close to Suing City. If there were any diseases, the mercenaries would be the first to suffer. The enemy should know this, so why did they still chase after them? Did they not want to live anymore? If these deserters said that the mercenaries were only chasing after them, he might believe them. However, if they said that the entire army was chasing after them, it would not make sense. Since they were elites, they should know the importance of cleaning up the battlefield. It seemed that these deserters were not trustworthy. Just say that they are deserters and are afraid of death. Drag them out and kill them. Hun Sen waved his hand to his deputy. The situation at the front was unclear, and it was hard to say if they had really lost the battle. However, what he needed to do now was to stabilize the morale of his troops. Otherwise, how could they fight the next battle? These 100 deserters were now very regretful. They didn't die under the fierce attack of the mercenaries and didn't surrender. However, they never thought that they would die in the hands of their own people. If they knew this would happen, they would have surrendered to the mercenaries. "General, what do we do next? Do we continue to advance?" The generals at the side asked. "It's already dark. Let's rest for the night. Send more scouts so that they could figure out what was going on ahead. Also, let's sleep with one eye open." Hun Sen thought for a moment before giving the order. After knowing that the enemy was cavalry, they set up many horse traps and stakes outside the tent to prevent sneak attacks in the middle of the night. There were even people with bows and arrows in the dark, waiting for the mercenaries to appear so that they could catch them off guard. The night passed peacefully without any signs of danger. In the morning, the scouts at the front sent back news that they were about to reach Suing City. However, they did not find any corpses left behind from the battle. As for the whereabouts of the 50,000 men, they were still searching and there was no news for the time being. Haha. Hun Sen laughed heartily when he saw the report from the scout. "I told you that the 50,000 soldiers in front of us would be fine. Otherwise, how could we have cleaned up the battlefield so quickly after such a big battle? Humph. I was almost killed by those cowardly deserters. Killing them would be too easy for them. Give the order for the entire army to head to Suing City after breakfast." "General, should we wait for the army there before we advance?" A deputy general asked cautiously. It was understandable if one deserter said that, but more than 100 deserters said the same thing. This was suspicious. It doesn't matter. They must have taken advantage of the terrain to hide. As long as our main forces arrive, they will definitely come out. At that time it will be time for us to counterattack. All right, inform the army to prepare to depart. Hun Sen said confidently. There was nothing wrong with being cautious in a battle. However, being overly cautious would be seen as cowardice. The gains would not make up for the losses. After a night's rest, the 50,000 Gold Edge elite troops set off again, heading towards Suing City, which was 100 miles away. Their movement was discovered by the scouts of the 1st Cavalry Division who were hiding in the dark. They quickly reported to their commander, Tianhu, who was hiding in a valley nearby. Tianhu laughed when he heard that the 50,000 elites of the Gold Edge dynasty were not ambushed. Seems that some people have the same idea as us. They have given up on the night attack. Yes, Lung Feng is indeed Lung Feng. They must have realized that the 50,000 enemies were the elites of the Gold Edge dynasty. Moreover, they were prepared. It would be difficult to ambush them and they might even fall into the enemy's trap. The second commander, Lu Duo, nodded and sighed. That's right. Since everyone has made the same choice, the next attack should start soon. Brothers, we are the 1st Cavalry Division under the command of the 6th Young Master. No matter what, we can't lose to others. Our performance has been good. Now it's time to see who can take the head of Hun Senator. Are you confident? Tianhu stood up. He knew that the war was about to start. Before the war, he needed to boost the morale of his troops. On the other side of the road, the 4 divisions of Lung Feng were also ready to attack. After a night of fear, the Gold Edge army still chose to move forward. This could only mean one thing. They were not sure that the 50,000 troops in Suing City had been destroyed. Otherwise, they would have turned around and retreated. Comrades, the enemy is on the road. They don't know of our existence at this time. This is our chance. If I'm not wrong, the 1st Cavalry Division must be watching us from somewhere. They may take action at any time. Now let us fire the first shot. In a while, all regiments and battalions will gather all the machine guns in your hands. Once the battle starts, rush forward like a hot knife through butter. Target the enemy's center. As long as we can capture or kill the enemy's commander, the enemy will fall into chaos. Then it will be our moment of victory. Division Commander Ling Dechong summoned all the regimental commanders and battalion commanders of the 4 divisions and gave the order to prepare for battle. After the meeting, the officers returned to their respective units to make preparations. Half an hour later, when the 50,000 elite troops led by Hun Sen entered the preset ambush, a loud bugle sounded. Then countless soldiers in green military uniforms suddenly appeared on the ground. With machine gunners as the vanguard, they formed an attack force and rushed straight towards the enemy troops that were advancing towards Suing City. The sound of the bugle shook the sky, followed by the continuous sound of gunfire. The soldiers of Golden Rim fell to the ground one by one, like crops blown down by the wind. What's going on? In the middle of the army, Hun Sen, who was riding on a tall horse, asked loudly. If one looked carefully, one could see that there was a trace of panic in his eyes. Reporting to the general, we've encountered the main force of the mercenaries on our left. They're all armed with muskets. Our brothers won't be able to hold them off for much longer. A scout reported to Hun Sr., the main force of the mercenaries? How many people can there be? We have a total of 50,000 men. Tell our brothers don't be afraid. Just charge forward. I don't believe that their guns can kill so many of us. Hun Sen said confidently when he thought of the 50,000 men he had brought with him. As if he was afraid that his brothers would not give it their all, he added, "Tell everyone that each person who kills a gun will be rewarded with 10 silver taels. The more you kill, the more you will get. There is no limit." Yes. With such a generous reward, the scout was emboldened. He agreed and turned around to pass down the order. Just as he passed down the order, the 1st Cavalry Division appeared on the other side of the road. The cavalry was like a roaring train. As soon as they appeared, they rushed into the Phnom Penh army with an unstoppable momentum. They reaped one head after another as their cavalry sabers flew in the air. They took one life after another. They were like the last straw that broke the camel's back. As soon as they appeared, the army of Phnom Penh had no way to fight back. What was more terrifying was that one of the troops was heading towards the middle of the army. Wherever they went, no one could stop them. No one could defeat them. On the other side, the 1st Regiment of the 4th Cold Front Division cooperated with them. The regiment commander, Zhou Xian, personally held a squad machine gun and constantly ran forward with his legs. Anyone who was targeted by the muzzle of the gun was shot through by the rotating bullets and fell to the ground. Zhou Xian's speed was very fast. In addition, he had charged earlier than the 1st Cavalry Division, so he was closer to the middle of Phnom Penh's army. At this time, it was no longer a question of whether they could defeat the enemy, but a question of who could take the first credit. Originally, Hun Sen had intentionally left 5,000 elite soldiers behind in the middle of the army to prevent the other party from launching an attack on him. In his opinion, with these soldiers protecting him, no matter how strong the enemy was, it was impossible for them to kill him so quickly. As long as the middle of the army was fine, he could command the front and rear troops to outflank the mercenaries and win the war. Who would have thought that the mercenaries were indeed heading straight for the center of the army, but their speed and impact were simply too fast. They were so fast that the 5,000 soldiers under his command actually fell into chaos as soon as they met the enemy. Then, in the face of such powerful combat power, cowards and deserters appeared. Don't be afraid. Hold on. The front and rear troops will soon come to save us. At that time it will be time for us to fight back. Hun Sen rode on the horse and shouted loudly, trying to boost the morale of the army. As he shouted and looked around, his face suddenly became frighteningly pale. The front troops were in chaos and were fleeing in all directions. The rear troops had already separated from the middle troops. At this moment, countless soldiers had already turned around and fled. They didn't even have the courage to face the enemy. Just like that, they became deserters. In fact, whether it was the guns of the 4th Cold Front Division or the sabers in the hands of the 1st Cavalry Division, they were far from what an ordinary army could compete with. Even though they were the 50,000 elites of Phnom Penh dynasty, their morale had long been slack when bad news came from the front. Now, in the face of a strong attack, who could summon up the courage to fight? Not to mention whether it was bullets or sharp sabers, they were no match for them. What else could they do at this moment? You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.